So yeah, your picture looks good. Of course, we're going to be, playing with the internet all night long, Skyping into a few people from the Facebook page, and doing a lot of technical wizardry here. So hopefully it all works out. So right now we're live streaming around the world. A lot of people that have joined Michael Tsarion's MTSAR Conspiratorium Facebook page have posted a lot of questions for Michael, and we have a lot of excited people here in Toronto that want to ask you a few things too. But before we get started, I just wanted to thank Patrick and Kadena, who are the proud owners of this wonderful conspiracy culture bookstore in downtown Toronto, west end of Toronto, down by the lake. Just wanted to thank them again for their hospitality, and I urge everybody watching online to go to their website, conspiracyculture.com, and check out all the cool things that Patrick and Kadena have posted up there. I'd also like to thank my cameraman for tonight's event, James Morrison. We're trying out a few different things as we go along with these live web stream events, and James has been very patient in working through all the bugs and the technical difficulties, and if it wasn't without him...
oh, come on. Working with you, dude.
It's a team effort. Yeah.
We all have different skills here.
Beside me here is Dave Whitehead. Dave interviewed Michael Tsarion on American Freedom Radio last Monday, 2 Mondays ago, and it was such an amazing interview. Dave's graciously joined me here tonight, and we're both going to be co-hosting. I'm going to be pretty much manning the computer, while Dave's going to be doing most of the hosting duties. I'll be asking questions that are posted on the Facebook page. Everybody that's watching online, I put up a new banner just about 20 minutes ago. If anybody has any questions while the event is going on, I urge you to post them there. I'm going to keep track of them in real time here in Toronto. And if there's something that's really cool or fits into the discussion as we go along, I'm gonna stop the discussion. I'll ask Michael those questions as we're going along. Also, too, I saw Michael on your website page, michaeltsarion.com. You mentioned if anybody else wants to get involved with doing web streams themselves and having you as a guest. You and I discussed this on a few occasions, and I offered to assist Michael in training anybody else out there that wants to take up this really cool and interactive idea, and I'd be happy to donate my time to making sure that happens and is a success. So looking forward to other parts of the world getting involved in talks like this today.
I've had from New Zealand, South America, 2 in Britain, I think 1 in Northern, even 1 in Norway, amazingly. So there have been offers, and those people are still in the pipeline, and there's definitely a lot of interest in pulling this off. It's just that maybe some of the people locally don't have the right technology and all the rest of it, but it's early stages. Yeah, this is the 3rd one we've done, so I'm sure it's such a strong idea anyway, and I'm sure it'll take off even more this year.
Okay, perfect. So with all those hellos and welcomes done, it's really excited to get into some of these questions here. Just wanted to know, Michael, when we were talking via email about tonight's event and what you talked about on Dave Whitehead's show last week about the future of the alternative research community. Just wanted to know if you wanted to start off with a few words about that, and then we can get into some of the good questions.
Yeah, I'd say that people need to listen back to that. It came out great. It's a format I really enjoyed doing. There's some interviews that are my particular favorites, and that one was certainly one of them. Because it is so important. We're at such a crucial juncture. I see it in the questions that people are leaving even on Facebook and asking me in person, and a lot of the answer to those questions actually is really just about reiterating where we are, that both historically and also as we spoke about in the interview, since 9/11, there's been a lot of awakening, and we are on the way to something that's very profound. Of course, my work focuses a little bit more on pointing out what the dangers are that could impede the progress. But at the same time, it is an age of solutions that we're in. I've been saying that since 2002 in some of my first professional interviews. And I noticed even on Facebook, some people are talking about, we need more solutions, and I keep having to keep emphasizing my work is full of them. And anyone who's followed the work closely knows that I've got solutions. Those who actually betray themselves, haven't been following it very closely, they come along and start talking about, there's not enough solutions in my work. This is utterly preposterous. It's just that why they think that is because I put so much emphasis on the psyche as one of the elements of solutions, right? It's not just politics, or it's not just charity, or it's not just collective action. So they need to, be aware that, I got a lot of solutions, but they're maybe not the kind that people want. That's the whole point. We're in a great danger here of, collectivization, overrunning people's individuality. And so we brought that out very strongly in the interview. And we got to actually everything in that interview. There was, you have to try and get everything in and not go into too many digressions. But as a matter of fact, we got a lot in that interview that are very crucial. And each one of those aspects could be unpacked even more. And that's why the Conspiratorium, with the extra time is so utterly vital. Because even on an interview, as good as they are, there's a limited time to explore some of the more crucial aspects regarding the self. And I must say, just in opening, that I'm absolutely stunned and impressed about the quality of questions for this Conspiratorium in May. They're exceptional. I just couldn't believe what I was reading. These are fantastic questions right across the board. And the ones that we don't get to verbally, I'll be on Facebook, trying to give as good answers as I can in the following days and throughout the year, because again, we can only get to some of the most important ones verbally on the Conspiratorium, but I'll always be trying my best to answer the other ones as well. But I must just say, this is especially impressive, the spring Conspiratorium here. These questions are outstanding, and thanks to everyone who checks in today, and also who wrote these and posted these. A lot of, as you said, David, on your interview, a lot of deeper meanings being asked now. People are really questioning, and if anybody ever doubted it, they should check out these questions for this particular Conspiratorium. They're phenomenal. I'm really impressed.
Well, absolutely, Michael, and it was an honor to do the talk with you, and I think we definitely addressed a lot. I think we got through everything very well, and we're looking forward to getting even deeper here today. So we'll just go right over to Chris, and we'll start with the first question, if that's okay with you, Michael.
Okay.
Okay, Michael. Marvin asks, I have a theory that when people are brought up according to the laws of nature and the natural human side of the person is brought out. However, when people are brought up in an abusive family or families that suppress the child's natural feelings and impulses, that this brings out the alien aspect in humanity. Thus, the church and most religions encourage suppression to bring out the alien side in our society. As you say, we both have alien and human, and that it depends on how we are brought up as to which side dominates. I just wanted to know if you wanted to comment on Marvin's question there.
Yeah, one could do the whole Conspiratorium on that. Of course, he needs to, if he hasn't already, I mean, it looks like he already has, but for those who have questions similar to this, must go to unslaved.com and watch the free DVD I did on Atlantis, the long one, Atlantis, Alien Visitation, Genetic Manipulation, and pick up the book. It's on Kindle now, so very inexpensive. It's been updated as well. So all the answers to really unpack this question are there. But he's absolutely right. When one looks through the kind of fraud of genetics that's been handed us to today and looks into the ancient mythology, yeah, we have the story, I mean, blatantly. I don't care what you're looking at, but whatever myth from whatever it is around the world, you're hearing about that man is a schizoid being. He's polarized. And there's nothing we can do about it. You see, there's no way, I mentioned in the Atlantis book that we're stuck with it. We have the alien and we have the human. And that's never going to change. But what can happen is that we work to deprogram ourselves of the alien strain, which is basically the evil in us, the inhuman within us, right? Which is very deep-seated, and I believe it has a genetic component. It's not just a moral question, which is what Christianity and other religions attempt allegedly to help man develop on a moral basis. Whether they've been successfully, or not is another question, but it goes deeper than that. It's not just a moral question. Even people raised in very, very good families with tremendous moral forebears can grow up to be extremely callous people. So instantly we see that it's not just simple questions of parenting and simple questions of that. Although that's a huge factor, there seems to be something else in the human psyche that has this desire to be unjust and sadistic and what have you. We can never rule out the psychology, we can never rule out the parenting. That's crucial to the solutions. But in my work, it just seemed that the mythologies were also saying something deeper about that. The question, Marvin's asking, how do we fix it? What can we do? How do we make one side, dominant over the other? And there's lots of answers to that. One is, as I said in the conclusion of my Atlantis work, and also at the end of the post-humanism talk, a desperate need to get back into a true rapport with nature. This doesn't mean that we stop talking with people or we stop our social interactions, but we must integrate nature and the animals, back again to a very high extent, so that our focus is not just only on the human world, because that's sort of taking our guidance from the misguided. Nature is the ultimate teacher. And so a new connectivity to nature, to animals, and to the universe is very much part of this, and unpack that in the last chapter, right? And also in the last section of the post-humanism went into great detail with that. Returning to Earth is also is consistent with a lot of the older Celtic, Druidic teachings, even the Native American Indian, about that the Earth itself was traumatized. So in the sort of the healing of the Earth, this is more in a Druidic way. But that also has some relevance to the healing within, the healing of the psyche. They're not disconnected, you see. But never forgetting that the more important, even in one sense, more important than the genetic manipulation. I mean, that's pretty catastrophic to our biology, right? But overlaid on top of that was the Earth catastrophe, which unless we heal that, unless we heal what occurred with the age of trauma, the age of catastrophe, which is our connection to the Earth, we can't even get back to the original situation. See, so there's layers here. There may have even been other effects of the trauma that we don't really know, but the few that I've been able to isolate is that the ego was born out of this trauma. That's why the ego has the peculiarities it does. That's why we're split, which implies that we have a true self. What Carl Jung and people have probably called the collective unconscious or the race memory. We have a total self, which is the kind of remnant that once upon a time, many thousands of years ago, existed. And then we have this now ego developed, this hyper-individuated ego consciousness, with all of its pros and cons, helping us to function in the world one to another. And so we are divided. I mean, simply, the frontal lobes, the limbic realms, the right hemisphere, the left hemisphere, male and female, masculine and feminine, more importantly. So there's a tremendous oppositions and divisions that exist within the psyche. And each of them needs to be negotiated, each of them, needs to be, that's what that yin-yang symbol is so important, really. The eyes of the dragon. There's an enormous, or even good, evil. You and me. I mean, so the people we bring into our lives are often mirrors of other aspects of our own self. The ancients believed that we're many selves. But an important, coming back more to practicalities, when I say relationship to the earth needing to change, or the universe, I also mean it first, relationship to one's own body. After all, the corporeal part of us is in fact the human body. So then we're into the realm now of Wilhelm Reich, who I mentioned continually through my work, especially his scheme, which kind of undoes or helps to explain some of the Freudian Jungian palaver about, topographical states of consciousness within it, like you've actually got sections in your head called id, ego, superego. These are just metaphors, but people forget that. So Wilhelm Reich's work is very important. His protege, Alexander Lowen, the language of the body, you see, and that kind of Wilhelm Reichian concept of the body physical is all part of this reconnectivity to the earth, so to speak. And then another important, vitally important teacher is Alice Miller, who, if anyone said, well, I'm in touch with my body, Michael. Yeah, after you've read at least one of her great books, like say The Body Doesn't Lie, which is the one I always recommend for beginners, you will soon see why Tsarion goes to such endless lengths talking about the body and its importance. Because she points out from a trauma-based understanding, and remember if we haven't been totally physically traumatized in a brutal sadistic way, but wait a minute. The simple act of being born, whether the parents are trying to do the right thing or not, there's a lot of assault on the physical body, not just in the food we eat, but in all sorts of ways, especially with women, the way that they're brought up, girls are brought up to sit in certain positions and be in certain ways. And so it goes right across the board. The famous armoring, which is should be well known because it has such a large impact on health in general. The millions of dollars that people spend on medication and these allopathic systems because their bodies are tense, and their bodies are stressed. This all ties into it. The flow of bioenergy. Alice Miller, his whole concept of how the body is traumatized, either extremely so when it's open violation from parents, beatings, brutality, all that kind of thing, but even lighter versions. The clothes we wear and all sorts of aspects to this. And the record of the body and how the body's natural intelligence. We in the West have such a slim understanding of this. Knowledge of it may creep through hatha yoga, and some people who dip into those kinds of things, and that's good to an extent. But the West really needs to be infused with this knowledge again. Now, of course, Wilhelm Reich, as we know, was arrested, incarcerated, and literally died in federal stockade. And his works were then blocked and suppressed. So, I mean, if you want to ask the reasons why we don't know anything about this, there's damn good reasons. Is that the powers that be would rather that Alexander Lowen and Wilhelm Reich and Alice Miller had never written a book in their lives. And there's not too many other teachings on this. And the other ones get a little bit too Oriental and Eastern, which is not good either. In the Western context, these are the three scholars I highly recommend because the journey into, what's he talking about? Get back to nature. How exactly you do that? Well, it starts right in your living room in an attunement, opening that sixth and seventh sense to the attunement to the language of the body, to what your body actually is saying. And a lot of it has to do with unloading a lot of trauma that you may have consciously forgot about or even consciously excused. Right? We make excuses for a lot of the behavior that's happened to us. And that includes the suppression of anger, legitimate anger, the suppression of condemnation. We spoke before, remember, about this whole almost fallacy of forgiveness in many instances. Yeah, the mind likes to forgive, the body may not. So we don't have time to unpack the whole story here, but there's a whole language of the body which runs often contrary, right? Runs on opposite rails as the mind, which has all sorts of prevarications and excuse mechanisms and all sorts of, again, locked into the need for dependency. I need you to like me, so I'll like you even when I don't. I think it was Thomas Zaz who spoke about the fact that paranoid people are afraid of you, afraid that you don't like them, because in fact you don't. So again, the paranoid is based on, I don't like you. So the paranoid person is actually quite correct. Only it's considered an ailment, you see. So there's so much hypocrisy, there's so much of this stuff going wrong. But again, one of the ways to deprogram and decondition these alien aspects of ourselves is go back to nature, because the animals and the nature in the universe is a direct mirror to the wholeness that we lost centuries ago, and also in a new connectivity to the body. This will also, on another note, assist people with just the daily, sort of aberrations of the body, like overweightness and anorexia and all sorts of other issues. You see, the body's screaming for us to get back in touch, not by pumping iron and going out there and running and jogging and all this nonsense. Like I said in the post-humanism, people go to nature and then bring their bungee cords with them. No, that's not what I mean by going to nature. And it's the same thing in going to the body. I don't mean getting on the treadmill and pumping it and all this physical exercise. I mean that's you can do that if you like. I'm talking about an intuitive, sort of opening of another sense, and it's part of the clairvoyance. A lot of people are asking questions about divination and clairvoyance. Well, this is part of it. Starts right with your own, what is my body telling me? I mean, the Aboriginals, the Native American Indians used to notice the slightest, move or change or little pang or little twitch or twinge in their bodies, and they knew they were able to decode what it meant. The Egyptians, according to Swallow de Lubitsch, every single organ, the liver, the kidneys, the adrenals, the organs and the glands, were considered gods with a voice. I mean, there's a reason why the canopic jars existed and body organs were taken out of a physical body at the time of mummification and put in jars that looked like little animals, the 4 canopic jars. And the whole process of mummification and the whole process of wrapping each organ, in a very specific and reverent way. Because in the afterlife, those organs were going to step forward and basically speak and condemn you for mistreatment. So this has lots of ramifications, and we find anecdotes in the most ancient documents. the papyrus of, I don't think I can remember the name of it now, but there's Egyptologists know about these medical papyri. They're actually in many thousands. People don't know about this, but some of the biggest collection of papyrus ever found were based on medical, the treatment of ailments and illnesses, and there's some fascinating stuff in there. I have some information on that, just can't remember the individual name. So the study of how to revere the human body, and it's Alice Miller is the greatest expert on that. And again, if our audience hasn't heard of her name, be sure there's a good reason for that.
Yeah, that was excellent. Going on that, Rory Hinks just posted on the Conspiratorium Facebook page, and it's kind of alluding to what you just talked about, getting back to nature, what the Aboriginals and the indigenous populations of the earth, the sensing, the knowing, the being in tune with the earth in itself and all of its subtle energies. What Rory asked is, can you please elaborate on the esoteric significance of cyber technologies in relationship to consciousness, especially with the youth and the generation gap? What does the electronic ether have on us? What effect does it have on us, and is it real?
Well, this is part of the post-human agenda. I steered away from it because it's been done a lot by other people, and so in my post-humanism work I was focusing on more of the other stuff, the psychological. But that's not to say that this is not vitally important, because remember, all this cybernetics, all this robotization, somebody said that in the past we were enslaved. In the modern global conspiracy, we're robotized. So take your pick. In the past we were slaves, now we're going to be made into robots. But this mechanization has been long predicted. We know that some scientists, like Curtis Schaefer and all these people, are back crazy. Can't wait. Even these creatures like Stephen Thaler and people like that, who try to disguise it under some mystical sounding terminology and all that, right? But this mechanization has its roots again in the psychology of man. Jean Baudrillard, the French philosopher, said that the more you surround yourself with artificial goods, the more you surround yourself with plastic stuff, the more you surround yourself with artificiality, in the end, the human being who is the so-called subject in this world, in their own life becomes so objectified, so plastic, and so artificial. And it's part of the alien agenda as well, because the more we steer towards that alien gene, right, that's a very heady thing, that's a very intellectualized place that's not necessarily connected to the emotions, it's not necessarily connected to the body, not necessarily connected to the earth. So this has been a steady move towards this sort of mechanized, dehumanized state of consciousness. That is the old ancient alien agenda, but we are able to see it operating today. And its roots are in the psychology of man, not just in being surrounded by gadgetry, but in a deeper need to remove oneself from the organic. Is basically the only way to answer this. And so we need to get back in touch with art, painting, woodcraft, music, and martial arts, and things that bring us back to the living tissue, to the living body and its capabilities. And we need to have that in our lives very strongly. Or even animal husbandry, or whatever your interest is, so that one is returned to the sort of miracle of the body. To get out of it's great to be into the technology, it's great to have it, but we also need to balance it.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for that, Michael. And we have another question from a very regular contributor to the Facebook page. This question is from KM, and what Kay's asking is, the more spiritual I become, the more absolutely batshit insane and weaponized my parents become against me. I've had to disown them, and they'll always think it's because I'm bad. They find any reason, anything at all, and they use it as an absolute weapon against me. How come the common man is so easily effed?
Well, Kay, thanks for that one. If you go to my mission statement on the forum, there's a part answer there, which is that, any teacher is a threat, and parents are parents in general are basically dictators and tyrants. Behind all the smiles and behind all, maybe they have provided a roof and some food and whatever, but a close examination of the average parent is horrific to watch in the way that they treat their kids. Like for instance, get to your room, go to sleep, this kind of thing. When the child lies down and falls asleep, it's tired. Not when you tell it to get lost and go to this room, then it needs to go to bed. So from the slightest from this, almost these, it's just unbelievable, you know, it's unbelievable. And so, you know, in a strange, quirky way, what I meant to say there is that they obviously, people of that ilk, even though they force you to go to school and want you to get an education, they want you to get this learnedness, but they don't want you to flex your natural intelligence. And they certainly don't want you to flex your natural genius, which many of the people in this movement have had that, and are much, much more intelligent than their parents from a young age. Well, parents are deeply threatened by this, some more than others. As all mediocre types are, you know, threatened by genius and talent. What will happen is a parent will know how to manipulate your genius and your talent. Say a girl is a very good dancer and looks like she's going to be a big star, you know, or classical guitarist or whatever you want to look at. The parents may envy that skill, not necessarily want the child to have it, but then it suddenly twigs on them that they will get a lot of attention by having such a genius child, you see. In fact, we all know the type of parent who always pushes their child when they aren't a genius, but trying to convince everybody that they are. But but then there are circumstances where the child really does have a natural talent, or is naturally beautiful or gifted, or what have you. And the parent, to fill their empty existence, will, you know, use that child's genius. In fact, more children than you could possibly imagine are actually, whether they realize it or not, actually right as they speak right now, living out the dreams of their parents. Even the career that they're in, the job that they're doing, the work that they may be doing, or the gifted work that they may be doing, is actually living out some sort of life that the mother or the father wished subconsciously. This may never have passed in words in this family dynamic, by the way. But the child has been subtly manipulated into living out, right? Being an actor, being a famous person, a politician, whatever. Living out the dreams of the parents that have never said it in so many words, but have geared that child. And therefore, in that child, there's some sense of being involved in what they're involved in, but also some deep discontent. In other words, there'll be a tension in that child which is unimaginable, and can even drive them to needing psychotherapy, because on one side of them, they see themselves being very successful and all the rest of it, but another side is terribly under the burden, under the gun. And you see this in sportsmen, and you see this in all sorts of areas. So, but then on the other thing I was going to say about this is that, in a way, the resistance of your parents and your peers also can be read well. It can be read as a meter, as a gauge, that the more people dislike you, and the more people are packing their bags to run out of your life, and the more people who want to get shot of you, including parents and other people that come into your life, and the limited time that they want to spend, or the kind of the obvious, you know, again, behind the veil of appearance, they really couldn't give a damn what you're studying, what you're interested in, especially in these subjects. All of that is a meter, a gauge that you're doing the real progress. The more resistance you get, and the more weird looks you get, it's actually a good sign. Because we have a long way to go in this journey, don't forget. You know, and we may be still in the early stages of it. So it just comes with the territory. In the end, you will find all the... if you're doing the work the correct way, you will find all the company, so to speak, that you require. You're not going to be lonely. It's just that there's a gray area between when the eagles are leaving the chicken coop. And I know nobody can help you with that. Nobody can soften it. It's one of these things one has to experience as you progress. It's just the way it is. But when the eagle is flying high in the clouds, then you will not be so pained by the little losses that you had, you know, when the chickens were saying, "Hey, what are you doing? Stay right here with us."
All right, thank you for that, Michael. We now have a question from a member of the audience, so I'll just pass it along.
You don't have to go too close.
Hey.
Just put it on your left. Just talk normally.
My name's Matt. How are you?
Okay, Matt, how you doing, Nick?
I'm good. I'm a really huge fan, by the way. My question is really kind of what if you have any thought on the use of psychedelic drugs to heal, or sort of what Graham Hancock was talking about, is these spiritual experiences get you back to nature, get you back to feeling at one and at peace around your fellow man and just in life in general, to sort of heal.
Mm-hmm.
but also, I guess, you know, get in touch with a real foreign entity in some experiences, you know, if you get into like dimethyltryptamine, the spirit molecule, and all that research. So just wondering if you had any thoughts on that.
Well, I'm not in personal favor of it, but that's just personal. So, you know, it's because of the kind of a family I had and the drug problems I saw around me. And I mean, even in Belfast, life, just the simple alcoholism, and growing up as a teen, a lot of my friends doing hash and, you know, marijuana, and then heading over to the States where everybody was doing it. You know, and I'm just in one way, I've just never been attracted to it. You know, as I said, mostly in the New Age movement, there was a lot of emphasis on this kind of thing, and it personally never attracted me. However, intellectually speaking, it comes with the territory of what I'm talking about. Those, you know, the getting back to the nature and the healing of some very old stuff. Because remember, imagine, let's hypothetically, you know, let's say that the traumatized person we were talking about, whose body is absolutely, I mean, we're not talking, you know, fun here. This is a person who might end up, you know, chronically sick, a person who could end up having years and years of expensive psychiatry and psychology because they're messed up like nobody's business. I know people who spent 30 years of daily exposure to, you know, all manner of massage therapy, from massage therapy all the way to rolfing and medicate, you know, vitamins, and I mean, people who've had to commit to every conceivable kind of diet. People whose lives have been laid low because of their need to heal from original traumas or some other malady. My God, if marijuana, you know, and I mean even the hemp aspect, you know, the medicines that can come from that, can heal that person, who's to stand in their way? And the same thing goes up the ladder, you know. I absolutely think that marijuana and all of these drugs, including pharmaceutical drugs, by the way, should be freely available. You shouldn't have to have them prescribed, and they should be over the counter. This is just a simple libertarian concept of that no man should tell anybody else what they can and cannot do with their bodies, right? However, because my work is so highly focused on the way that people escape authenticity, I always have a bit of a red flag when it comes to the whole drug culture. And of course, it's justified once anyone looks at the kind of palaver that was going on in the 60s and what have you, and in other areas as well. Not only is there a lot of illicit black ops involved in that, to frighten the living daylights out of you if you really knew what was going on, but also there's just the general evasion of possibly an entire, you know, I grew up on the Quatermass, Doctor Who's stuff, you know, where, you know, whole populations can be anesthetized and dumbed down using all these psychotropic drugs and subtle means of psychotropic entrainment and what have you. So I got a lot of personal issues with it. But again, if I have been back in about 2001. Was it 2001? Yeah, it's 2001. I ran into some people that kind of, I mean, you've never seen anybody more unbelievably rigid, and in regards, you know, the taking the drugs to their friends than this guy. I mean, absolutely out of control, screaming and yelling and fighting and kicking. You know, as soon as I smelt it, or you know, your brothers are doing it, or your family's doing it, or your friends are doing it, and I would literally go into a state of unimaginable, you know, meltdown. But a person who knew a lot about this subject, you know, the proper growing of the weed and all, and the whole drug culture basically, helped me see. And by the way, this was some hell of a task to do this. Not everybody could have done this, but I kind of was brought into understanding some of the more positive aspects, because for me there was like none. And yet at the same time, some of my big mentors, you know, some people that I really respect, you know, not just the Pink Floyds and the Moody Blues, but the Bob Marleys and you know, Peter Tosches and a lot of other people, you know, obviously we're doing this stuff and advocating it. So unbelievable, you know, it was that this Iron Man who this Beavis and Butthead total resistance to it, you know, slightly calmed down, at least to rationally see the other side of it. And so I'm still in the learning process, to tell you the truth. You know, I'm still not ready to go so far to endorse some of the heavier use of the more extreme things, because I sense the dangers. You and I, David, talked about that. You know, that Big Brother also has this thing in their backpack, you know, of the super drug that really, in a way that's almost indescribable, could melt down the whole of culture in a way that only people like Frank Herbert and the Blade Runner type of scenarios have spoken of. And Equilibrium, I think you mentioned having seen that film recently. That's a very serious threat, and always has been in their catalogue of things to unleash. Now, the average the average middle-class suburbanite in Toronto or London go, oh, me and my wife will never take it, Oh, yeah? Biggest illusion of all, because these things have their own way of attracting you once it happens, So my main point is this: as a person who works with a libertarian model, whatever a person wants to do, they should be absolutely allowed to do it. Why should, I wouldn't prohibit a person learning how to swim. I wouldn't prohibit a person from, taking DMT or ayahuasca or whatever they're into. And remember, attitude is everything. So as long as a person is not evading the responsibility of becoming a self, they're not doing it because everybody else is doing it. Many of these things I also used to embody myself, and I admit wrongly. But as long as they're not doing those kinds of things, then absolutely no one should stand in the way. No one should stand in the way. I'm coming from a world, up until I was in my late 30s, I was coming from a place of little understanding when it came to these drugs. I admit that. I was very, very rigid and very, very hard, and it took a hell of a job to soften me up to anything, It's very, very puritanical. So I'm still sort of taking on board that whole thing and looking at where it's at. But when you originally spoke, your question was about, the medical aspect, the healing aspect. And therefore, yeah, I'm in agreement that if it grows on Earth, it should be open and free. And we know that these Illuminati guys are doing it anyway, so who are they to prohibit anybody else? First, you shouldn't prohibit anyone anyway, and secondly, we know they're using all of this stuff, or have been. This is a Dionysian cult in the true sense of that word. We use that term specifically because these boyos, you see Dionysus with the grapes, or Dionysus with his chalice, his cup. What does that really represent? As many other authors have exposed, this whole pharmacological symbolism that you find in ancient art. Jesus as the vine press and all of that. There's a whole, as I also did in my Trees of Life book, the whole psychotropic symbolism that we have there is also part of religion, very much part of religion.
Thanks. Yeah, that's you summed it up perfectly. If I could add, though, I'm also interested in knowing what you think about reaching interdimensional beings, or the idea of it at least, something else that you feel separate from, but also together with. You obviously, that makes any sense.
Well, I would say that part, if you take a substance and you're being visited by something numinous, I would say that more than likely that is an aspect of your own consciousness that's occurring there, right? That's what I fundamentally believe. And yet, your average, Richard Dawkins type atheist types who don't even believe in a God, and believe me, I'm with them there. When it comes to the God of religion, I have no problem with them deconstructing that nonsense. However, that limited understanding, that thinks of the brain just as much grey matter, and it's just cortisone, and it's just, it's all adrenaline, and it's dopamine, and think of things in a very physicalized way. This is just bogus, right? Through and through. The one thing that our ancients were much further ahead is in an understanding of the selves that a man has, and all the different personalities that he has. So I'm very open to that we are yet not even dipping in even closely into what is a self. A self is actually a totality of senses and understandings, So I think that these drugs, that's what they do. They open you up to aspects of yourself, higher aspects of yourself. That's about what I've been able to glean. I'm no expert, but that's and I'll tell you what I think about that is. Do you notice that in the music of the Moody Blues and the music of Pink Floyd, after they stopped taking the drugs, they were shit. I don't know what this tells you, but holy crap. If you listen to some of these bands that were, heavily into the drugs, can you please go back on that stuff and start writing another Dark Side of the Moon, Because that music transformed people on a way that is indescribable. Almost epocally. And just pan-culturally. People will tell you that, albums of the Moody Blues and Pink Floyd and many others that get mentioned, somehow sum up something about the living in the 50s and the 60s. It's something that's tangible. Now that obviously is not the result of their conscious machinations or sitting down trying to incorporate that into the music. It didn't happen that way. It came through the LSD, it came through what they opened themselves to. Now that was their higher self speaking through them. But the moment that they stop it, these guys just turn back to these, in many cases, nincompoops. Or even if they're not nincompoops, then they're just sort of ordinary guys, sort of a bit bewildered themselves about what happened to them back then, that sort of song by the Moody Blues, Timothy Leary, the Legend of a Mind really sums it up. People should listen to that. Again, I don't like the band, but the Beatles, and then the Rolling Stones, all of these bands, they have songs that sort of incorporate an age, a spirit of an age, very, very much so. And you can absolutely tell that as soon as they stopped taking the drugs, that just completely disappeared. As good as the music may be, as technically brilliant, as interesting, wow, you can dance to it or whatever, but there's something missing underneath that had this other spiritual dimension that changed people's lives forever. And I personally think of some of these people in the music business as fathers, better than my own parents, people that had the greatest impact on me, who helped me when I grew up. If I hadn't had those bands, I don't know what I would have done.
Yeah. Just to mention on that, Bill Hicks does a good comedy spot where he says, if you don't think drugs have done good for people, take all your albums, all your records, all your tapes and burn them. Because the people who made those records were really high on drugs. So,
I think that one. Yeah, he always took, and of course it is still the same today. Somebody would say, oh, well, there's a lot of bands taking drugs today, but they're rubbish as well. Well, that's true too, but then there are a lot of bands out there that are taking drugs and they're not rubbish, like Porcupine Tree and many others I could mention, so it's a bit of both.
Okay, I'm going to be bringing on our first guest here. It's Curtis from San Francisco. Just going to try to give him a call here.
I'm clicking, hold on, yeah. Alright, hold on. Hold on. Some black here.
Hey Curtis, how are you?
Good, let me turn this down.
I can see him.
Good stuff. So Curtis is in San Fran. Say hello to Michael and everybody that's watching online. Curtis, thank you very much for taking up my invitation to bring you on. Michael was very excited about that idea. So you're the first and hopefully definitely not the last. So go ahead, shoot. Talk to Michael.
Okay, I had to turn one off, it was lagging. Let me keep with the stream of consciousness. Have you studied the archons, Michael?
Yeah. Are you talking about in the sense that John Lam Lash is speaking about?
Right. Yeah, the Gnostic parallels.
Yeah, his stuff is pretty generic. There's nothing, he hasn't added anything new. This is a very old subject, going back to the, some people call them cosmocrates, other people call them the daemons, But in my work, in my very first book on Atlantis, I deal with them. And I do believe they exist. It's a huge subject, and I've studied it for years, but it's always something you have to continue to read up on and unpack. It's so difficult to come to the bottom of what it means, because if you're familiar with Carl Jung, he would have taken it, he would have taken it and said, oh no, they're not physical beings by any means, they're just archetypes or, so everybody's got their own spin. But I actually believe they exist. I actually believe they exist pretty much in the way that the Gnostics originally intended them to be taken, and that is that there's some powers, that rule this world, rule this planet, rule consciousness. Whether they're created by our collective unconscious, that they're just sort of, because there's one school of thought that believes that they're just projections of us, they're projections of everybody's consciousness, and then they're sort of, constellated. An average archon is not independent of us. And then there's people who believe that they are, So it's just amazing. But you see, here's the thing why I kind of believe in them, and that is it likely that any human author or any human being, especially back in the pre-medieval times, is likely to come up with that concept? I don't think so. To come up with the idea of the archons doesn't sound to me that that's some random, thing. To be so specific about it is pretty incredible. But again, that's lumped into academics just lump that into, oh, well, that's just the, like the theory of Atlantis, or the theory of angels, or the theory of anything. They just lump it all as being mythology, especially in the Irish Celtic. That's just considered fairy folk tale, as most of the stuff is. But I've often said that the platform that we're on today, we can revisit a lot of this stuff. A lot of the symbolism which has been done, and a lot of this other Gnostic, teachings, and especially this concept of the archons. I think there's a lot to it, and that we still yet don't understand. Now, earlier on, Matt was asking about the beings that you might be able to contact if you take some of the drugs. I don't know if Curtis, you heard that, but see, this all ties in together. Yeah, this all ties in together. That I think that some of those beings are aspects of one's higher self, but you can never know. There's a whole school of magic, there's a whole school of sorcery that it also believes in taking drugs and doing rituals in order to directly contact these entities. I kind of took that concept and worked it into my Atlantis theory. Remember, I wrote about John Dee connecting with these macrobes of a very high level, of a very, very high and very sinister level, in order to get hold of some keys that they needed back here on Earth. And I believe that this kind of sorcery, there's a question coming up later on I saw on the Conspiratorium about the nature of blood and the significance of blood, so the person who asked that question should perk up at this point, because that ritual has very much to do with energy, psychic energy, and even physical energy in the form of blood, but also in the form of cortisol and adrenaline, and the sucking of that, and also using the whole human race in some sort of slavery situation, a slave race. So this is a huge subject, and one only has, it's like having a tiger by the tail, But in the last part of the Atlantis book, and also in the last part of the Atlantis DVD, I did deal with these cosmocrates, because I found some interesting anecdotes about them in the work of David Oveson, the guy who wrote the book, The Symbolism of our Nation's Capital. Anybody remember that book? It's not the symbolism of, but it's David Oveson, his first book.
The way Washington's laid out.
Yeah, that's the one. He wrote 2 books, but the first one, the name of it just... But I talk about that book quite a lot. I have a whole chapter on David Oveson's book, actually, in my Atlantis book. And in that is where I go into that, but also in the DVD. And the DVD is free, by the way, up on unslaved.com. So if you go to my website, Unslaved, click on Atlantis and kind of scroll towards almost the last hour, there's a good lot of stuff on the Cosmocrates and the Archons in that. Yeah, it's a very interesting subject. I just think that, there's Mana Blavatsky talked about it. So there's a lot of good work out there on it, yeah.
Did you want to follow up on that, Curtis?
Yeah, I guess what you were saying about the macrobes in John Dee, and that's why a lot of the generals in the military, they wear the regalia, the olive branches, or all the maple leaves, and even the queen. I think a lot of these people that are decorated, I think they are just generals too, like the queen. These figureheads.
Yeah, you see the way the cities are laid out. One of the most important parts of the Archon, I did mention this stuff about the regalia one wears, but the biggest, to me, one of the most frightening, I mean, in a true, Quaker mass way, is literally the design of our cities. The ritual, my friend Dan Tatman in Bath has looked around Bath, and he's come up with some interesting stuff there, and there's other scholars who've done it, and I get reams of stuff from people, who picked up on my work years ago, and have been sending me stuff from Belgium. One guy has sent me a lot of stuff from Belgium, which is absolutely frightening. And Brian Garish, although he obviously hasn't referred to my work, he doesn't know about my in-depth researches into this. In one of his latest interviews, I heard him talking about a place in Wales where there's these weird obelisks are turning up and weird designs, and I just wish that he knew more about my work. Because, I unpack all of that. So there are a lot of other people starting to notice that something odd is going on. The Olympic Games that just happened, the other designs in London and elsewhere. All of this, to me, is tantamount to supporting this concept of the Archons. Because, if they're up there, so to speak, not physically up there, but sort of up there, presence is looking down. There's something interesting in just the simple geomancy that's involved in the city design something ritualistic about it. And that's where my focus was from a child, actually, is going around and looking at the geomancy of these cities and wondering what the hell is going on here, you know. And I really do believe there's some ritual aspects connected to that, and the positioning of buildings and stately homes and what have you. I really do believe that.
There's also a lot of, when you get into the churches and you get into the symbolism on churches, I mean, just even here in Toronto and a lot of the government buildings here, you can see it all over the place. So I'm sure some of the people sitting here will recognize that as well. So I just wanted to add that in there, getting into the religious aspect.
Some cities have labyrinths. I mean, right in churchyards in San Francisco they got one. And it all looks all great for tourists and what have you. But who the hell knows what is really going on? That costs millions of dollars to make that. You know, and you wonder, in these stained glass windows with inverted pentagrams and the whole, you know, and then the connections between these, you know, there's a whole science of this. And then you pull back, and then suddenly you have this 33rd meridian grid line. You know about that. I featured in the Atlantis book from the works of Downard that show that the 33rd meridian of the Earth is, you know, specifically important again to Masons, and a lot of the deeper Masonry is indeed to do with this geomancy, which then ties in, as Richard Hoagland and others have shown, into the astrotheology aspect of the alignment of the constellations during important inaugural events and all sorts of rituals. We've gone into this, the dates. So why all of that? See, if you don't believe in the archons, then what's the purpose of doing all this celestial and geomantic alignment stuff? I don't get it. It has to be for some sort of supernatural, purpose. And it's not just the ritual. Oh, they're just doing it because it's ritual and holds themselves together. There's 1,001 rituals you can do in the lodge, which has nothing to do with making monuments 555 feet high and, you know, all sorts of other incredible sacred numbers being encoded into streets all over the world. It just seems to me a dead giveaway. Also the etymology of some of these places, Bow, Moral, Westminster, all this, there seems to be symbolism in that as well. So there's the etymology, the numerology, and the geomancy, and we're cracking that. A lot of people have done some fantastic work on this, like David Ovison and others. Even Graham Hancock's book, Talisman, very good book to get on this same subject. Now, I think Curtis, if you don't have the book Talisman by Hancock and Beauval, you should get it, because I think he talks about the archons in there as well. Not 100% sure, but it's a very good book to have anyway.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for that, Michael. And Curtis, we're going to bring on some other questions here. Did you have any final comments or anything before you take off?
Oh, I'm good, thanks. I'll sit back and enjoy the show.
Awesome.
Thanks for being part of it, Curtis. Thank you.
Thanks for calling in, man.
Very good question. Very good question, actually. That stuff opens a can of worms.
What do you want to do next, Patrick?
That archon stuff really opens a can of worms.
I'm just gonna. I'm gonna take a live Facebook question here, and it's basically going on what we just touched about, and with Curtis's question, it's about different veils of reality, and especially about the controllers. And I got a question here from Paolo, and Paolo asks, if the controllers realize that the pet refuses to enter their new lab, what will happen? Then he goes on to say, extermination or another upgrade of planetary deception. And basically, just to paraphrase, do we have a natural self-defense? Will we be able to identify this new lab and create a more healthy firewall?
Well, we're already in their lab. So it's not about being dragged into a new one. We're already in it. We're up to our eyeballs in their project. The second part of the question was what? Again.
Well, basically, he says, will the tricksters of consciousness reveal themselves, or is it impossible to perceive them as a conscious malfunction, or as a natural self-defense? Will we be able to identify them and create a more healthy firewall?
Okay, but at the very beginning, read the first lines again.
If the controllers realize that the pet, I guess the pet referring to us, refuses to enter their new lab. So I guess what Paulo's asking is, if their mechanisms of control start breaking down, what do you think will happen? Do you think they'll start building new laboratories for us to exist in?
Well, as I said, they already have pretty much got global, worldwide control. I don't think that the controllers themselves have ever been overly worried. You know, we've got the Brzezinski talking about a worldwide global awakening. So I think theoretically, yeah, they're concerned. And when they see that even an Alex Jones can, you know, bring in millions of people and talk a lot of sense, you know, and certain of their most secret agendas have been sort of exposed, right? Like the Constitution lie or the, you know, whatever it might be. I think we've made such good progress that indeed there's a certain worry now. I don't think there's been traditionally too much worry. That's why I kept on, and even in the interview we did, you know, David, remember we were saying that this is the age, this is the time that has never been before. So whereas I do not think that these people, they were too imperious for that, they were too dictatorial, too, you know, their concept of being overlords. Right? That's why I give that anecdote about, you know, the cottages in Ireland, you know, and the tax on the air and stuff. I mean, who would do things like that, you know? So their concept of superiority was too high for them to ever be overly concerned about any kind of rebellion, except today. So this is the only moment that the human race has had a chance to really crack it and really, you know, get this tiger by the tail and do something about it. And I think that there are people within the control mechanism, you know, the control cabals that are worried, seriously worried, about what might happen if this message starts to spread. And as I said so many times, they don't sit quiet, they do try to do something about that. And one of the ways is to keep on pulling the rug, you know, the three-headed monsters at the door. That then pushes us towards using more medication because we're very anxious and so on. So they are indeed. And remember, they always have an enemy. People are asking a little bit later on questions about Islam, you know, and all that. And so, yeah, we've got Islam, we've got Zionism, we've got Christianity. All of these things are created by the same monster. They're basically exactly based on the same foundations of belief and ritual, yet they're posed at each other because there's agents provocateur in there. Ordinary people within those three religions are not violent and don't want to kill anybody. But you have people within there, you know, that are provocateurs to always, these are the psychopaths, the agent provocateurs who stir up the trouble. And so there's always going to be a danger of monsters at the gate, and that can incite trouble. And there's a whole welter of other ways in which they're trying to erode. The wars are one. The wiping out of genes in the war, right? So that the people left are kind of weaker genetically, just from the simple ages of wars, and other diseases. Then the fluoride in the water, and then the bad food, you see, and the city lights and the environment, the fluoride, the fluorescence, I mean. So it's non-stop. And so the journey of the awakened is to keep on studying the means by which we're being dumbed down on all levels, biological and sociological. Right? It's a complete cataloging of the ways that this evil is being used. This is the way out. This is, you said, the defense, reason, human intelligence, to catalog and observe and be so attentive to all the means by which we're being dumbed down. This is extraordinarily important. And then that will lead, right, that analysis will then lead to other more subtle strengths that we can't talk about one-to-one. You see, they arise from within your own self. As you start doing something, and just like anything that you do over time, other skills start arising out of that. But the soil is just a simple, original awareness that there's a predator. Don't listen to people who tell you there's no conspiracy. There is. And it's, you know, the slow and methodical exposure to oneself, first of all, that there is definitely a conspiracy at work. And then later on, through a blog or a website or some talks or writing a book or something, we try to reach out to the rest of mankind, you know, humankind, to let them know. But we don't use that as a motive. Don't use that as a motive. Try to prove it to yourself, first of all, to your own reason. And then pick an area that interests you, and then go on and make it public. That's the logical way to do it.
Absolutely, Michael. And just as you were talking, I was thinking of the fear element in this, because as people are putting their attention on the darkness that's taking place and all these different things that are taking place, the first reaction is a fear-based reaction, where people are feeling helpless and people are realizing that, oh, this is really, really big. And you know, we talked a little bit about that in the interview. I just wondered if you wanted to add anything about, because you were saying something in the past about how don't fear it. Investigate it, learn it, know it, and it's almost as if by doing that process, you are going to eliminate that fear that you might have, right?
Yeah. Frank Herbert said that, fear is the mind killer. And the anxiety I just spoke about, morning, noon, and night through the media, sometimes subtle, sometimes not so subtle, is the constant fear. If you look back through all the political phases that we've had, right? Bush, Clinton, back to Reagan, you cannot count how many incidences there has been to scare the bejesus out of everybody. Whether it's been some diseases or flus, or some financial meltdowns, or the threat of war, or the threat of this, or the threat of that, right until the present day. So it's right there in our face. The whole concept of scaring the human race is a perpetual thing. And it has traumatized people, the trauma settings. There's a lot of other people, even in the mainstream now, who've co-opted this. I mean, when I say co-opted, I mean stolen straight out of conspiracy features. The whole idea of even Naomi Wolf or whoever was going on trying to do this whole American tour on the trauma. It's like they're stealing this stuff from the people who've spent years studying this. Yeah, trauma. We've been traumatized utterly. And it's an incredible study to how to see how that has happened and how it works. It's amazing how they work on our pineal gland, pituitary gland. You see, there's a lot of fear, anxiety. And then there's a difference between fear and anxiety, So, yeah, that has to be borne in mind at all times.
Excellent. Thank you, Michael. We do have another question from a member of the audience, so I'll just pass it over.
Okay.
Hi, Michael. My name is Randy. It's great to talk to you.
Thanks, Randy.
So my question, I had to write it down, so pardon, I have to read, is more about like today's children and like the last two generations of children. More of the westernized ones, not so much ones that don't have access to a lot of technology. But my question is, these last two generations of children were born into the sickest time of modern humanity. They seem to have a hard time making interpersonal relationships or even something as easy as making eye contact with people. Mm-hmm. Also, like having a hard time interacting within the physical world, or how they live on the internet basically, and the life they lead on there is more important than the one that they lead outside of those outside of that area. I feel that they are lost and almost mechanized. Are they salvageable? Can they be unplugged without damage?
Not if the universities and the schools remain in the desperate state that they are, and not unless the parents start taking a serious interest in this kind of subject matter. There's no chance of saving them, and the fallout that we see is made even bleaker when we look at the fate of these kids. As you say, they're absolutely dehumanized. We said on the radio interview with David, we talked about this and said that it's unlikely that the average teen can even finish a sentence, let alone a thought. They don't like the space between two thoughts. They're constant doers in the most excessive sense, losing their whole beinghood in being preoccupied with doing. They're chronically, even though when you see the kids with the headphones on, right? Not just kids, of course, but all sorts of people walking around now, and you see this fixation of always listening to the music and having the headphones in. What does that do? It gives you, on the first glance, the illusion of individuality, doesn't it? I mean, that's what Apple try to sell out of you anyway. It's part of their marketing. Hey, man. But as a matter of fact, they're all doing it, so there's nothing individual about it. So the whole contradiction starts there. That a lot of what the kids have been fooled into thinking is a statement of individuality, is anything but. I think, who was it? The famous guitarist Bert Jansch said once that when punk came out, it was all the rage. Everybody thought it was a sign of iconoclasm and rebellion. 5 minutes later, every middle-class kid was spiking their hair and coloring it and wearing the gear. It was a fashion in seconds. So the kids are basically the dumpsters of the whole era of society, which, as we know, goes way up to the corridors of power, but is filtered to them through the pressures of the parents and the grandparents. We used to be taken around our grandparents' house, and it would be just one continuous lecture on the length of our hair and the scruffiness of our appearance and what have you. and they wanted us to be like the neighbors' kids and what have you, you know, and you'll be taken for girls, and you know, and it didn't work on us, but there's other kids where that really would confuse you, you know, and so a lot of the way that they shut out by going towards the technology is you have to understand that a lot of this is in a strange way, as repulsive as it looks, it is actually justified. It is actually normal. In the subconscious of most children, they realize exactly how aberrant and malignant and hypocritical their parents have been and are. And so in this turning off and tuning out and anger, you know, basically it boils down to a sense of rejection of the parent, more egregiously when the kid moves to be about 13, 14, but sometimes even in earlier kids, they're very, very rebellious. And in the kids that are considered pathological, you know, like the more schizophrenic children, you know, actually what it is a very healthy rebellion against absolute mental control. We keep talking about mind control and mental control, you know, talking about some very elite groups. My God, the biggest form of mental control, mind control and emotion control and somatic control, like we said earlier about how children's bodies, the idea of their parents, you know, teaching them about how they think of their bodies, or in school, that their only concept of the body is to be armored and out there and kicking the ball around and competition and all this absolute nonsense, you know. The whole scenario, the child's spirit is in a state of absolute rebellion. The only thing is, rebellion and transgression is often the flip side of the coin of authoritarianism. So the poor child doesn't realize that in its efforts to smoke pot, break windows, paint graffiti on everything it can find, slash its wrists, or do whatever it's doing, identify with all sorts of groups and bands and whatever, that is not progress. And Big Brother's already co-opted all of that. It's all ahead of you. It's going to put a Malcolm McLaren in your way, or any of these other, you know, pop culture idols, in order to pipe you exactly where Big Brother needs to go, because Big Brother's not stupid. It already knows that you're sweating bullets, that your psyche's under pressure. And so the stuff that you're talking about, that you see, these aberrations, are actually courtesy of Calvin Klein and Gucci and The Gap and all, you know, from 1950s, the preposterousness of the Pepsi and Coke advertisements have gone blue in the face trying to bring this to the attention of the public. And even a deeper analysis that's even being done. You'll see a lot of work on this, but you know, they're not going deep enough into what it's all really all about. Why are these skulls and ravens and dead bodies and corpses and weird gothic stuff in the subliminal art? Why is it that particular necrophobic, necrophiliac symbolism? You see, because that deals with the death instinct. That deals with the limbic realm. It deals with a very... why do you think so many teens go and kill themselves? Either they're blowing their brains out or they commit slow suicide through drugs and other means, right? And then we have the Columbine disasters and all of these kinds of things. This is because the teens are rebelling. Just because the rebellion is an inauthentic form of rebellion doesn't make it any less rebellion, though. And it doesn't exonerate the parents. In fact, it implicates them. Because in my eyes, a parent is a ruddy dictator. And there's no short way around this. And if people don't take that from me because I ain't got no letters after my name, then by all means go to the Alice Millers and other people who do have the letters after their name, and the Thomas Zodzes and everybody else, and they will explain it to you. But you see, here's the heart of your question. Is the same question we asked, is there any chance of the people at the top of the power pyramid changing, like becoming moral? Actually, you should ask that question closer to home. Is it likely that parents of the past and the present and the parents-to-be, are they going to actually think about a thing called parenting and find out what it is? Are they actually going to be responsible? Are they actually going to know what a child's psyche is all about, which means looking into themselves, does it not? Or are they just going to continually breed children as sort of slaves, infant slaves, to fill a void in their own lives? So the question then, you see, can't be answered until there's an absolute understanding of this pecking order in society. Because there's an enormous slavery. Remember in posthumanism it said, no master above, no slave below. But you see, wherever I look, I see children being treated as slaves in many ways. Control in the clothes they wear, control in the friends that they hang around with, control in how late they come in the music that they watch, and the TV they watch. all of this, there's so much control that almost it's secondary, the stuff that they're looking at. Certainly a lot of it has a negative input, but that's almost secondary to the control of their minds. You see, that the parent is imposing. Now the parent may justify it by saying, well, I'm trying to do best, I don't want to expose my kid to this and that and the other. But by justifying control doesn't make it any less control. So this is a very tangled area, you see. And the undereducated, ill-informed parent who is subconsciously in evasion, hasn't been doing their homework, hasn't been dealing with their own trials and tribulations, they're going to watch their daughters and sons, as soon as they reach 14, it's away I go. And the whole connection is broken, if not before. And it is more than just simple generation gaps. You know, it's actually to do with a whole dynamic of control. But unfortunately, the controller doesn't see it. His actions of control are invisible to himself. They cease being invisible when you study it, when you pick up the books and you learn about parenting properly and how this control mechanism works. But very few parents are inclined to be doing that. They're not turning to the Rudolf Steiners, they're not turning to the Wilhelm Reichs, they're not turning to the Alice Millers, they're not turning to the Karen Horneys, and all these people that are experts in child development. The Jean Piaget and the Reggios and so many others I could mention, you see. The Pierre Janets and all of these fantastic people. Nobody's reading their stuff. Nobody gives a damn about that. You know, even John Gray in the modern times has written some very good stuff on the raising of kids. You know, how many people are reading those books? How many people are reading anything about that? You know, there's a whole subject there to explore.
Well, I'd say you're right. There is a great deal of research to be done by most parents, but I mean, we're all born into slavery. We can all choose to break our own bonds. My question is I have a child that I don't get to see, and she's very much one of those children that are lost. And I've broken my bonds. I only have a job to eat and to live someplace for now, and to make sure that eventually she's safe. Can we all do that?
Well, I don't know about, I can't talk about all. All I can do is deal with each instance. You see, you are not doing what all people are doing. You're asking the question, you're thinking about it, that's what other people are not doing. So you're one person who happens to be taking this on and caring deeply in a way of conscience, not just dutifulness of a parent, but a conscience. That rare word that says, forget that she's my daughter, this is a soul who's under unimaginable weight of mind control from the mother up, probably. And where the hell, what can I do to get in there, and fix it? Well, you see, all you can do is sort of hold the truth for that person. If there's something in your daughter that's really of you, one day that daughter will come to you. And here's an answer to a lot of this type of thing. Too many cooks in the kitchen, we know, destroys the meal, right? In one way, it's on the more subtle level that we get work done, which is converse with the spirit of your child, right? Because you're on the outside representing her spirit within. Any awakened person, male or female, right, comes into that person's life, gives birth. The moral voice that's already in her, but is way back there because there's all this other ego stuff in the way, and also the programming of the world, which is very similar to what ego is actually. The pseudo-self is the product of the world. But you represent something in the deepest recesses of her nature, right? Beyond the role. So in one way, you have to sort of represent that sort of witch doctor, shaman, awakener, Merlin. You have to play that game. You have to be like that. Not the father. That one not going to work. As we just finished saying, that is rubbish. We need to step out of these roles and deal with each of us, deal with each one of us, human to human. We have forgotten about that. We're into brothers and sisters and fathers. Even the Christ says in the Matthew, I come with a sword to separate all of that. My God, that should be burned into people's minds. That the real archetypes of spirit come in to separate, to divide us from these roles. Those are just functional things. But on a spiritual path, they mean nothing. Your daughter could be there to teach you while you're bothering trying to teach her. You could be learning a lot of stuff. You see, this is a very, very cunning, there's a lot of stuff involved in all of this. So, and also don't forget, that the things that you think are happening to her that are very pestilential might be the very ingredients to make her a genius tomorrow because she's experienced it. So in almost trying to protect somebody from the aberrations of the world, the malignancy could indeed be the worst thing to stop them being a great advocate tomorrow against it. So the parent who even wants to dive in there and assist them in one way, you're cutting off another thing in another. So, but the thing is that in life, the reason why we can't separate from the roles is because of that dictatorial instinct in the adultism. We want to control those children and those sons and daughters in a subtle way. So to pull away and to be human to human, the child can do it. In fact, I think this rebellion that we're talking about is that attempt for the child to free itself so it can just deal with, the parents not as parents but as people. But the parents don't allow it. And there's 101 ingenious ways in which the parent re-initiates their authority in this authoritarian model. But there is always a solution to every problem. And one of the best ways is to just present yourself as an archetype almost, so that when your daughter's consciousness sort of speaks to her, and you've been speaking to her from the outside, or at least holding that voice for her, right, then there'll be something within her that will motivate her to come back to you. Right? It's unspoken. Because sometimes trying to get in there and draw pictures is useless. You have to work on another frequency altogether. A very still place. This is the fragility of it. And almost be able to also let it go as well. Instead of plunging in and trying to re-hardwire, some of us need to be able to pull back and say, enough, I can't, know our limitations, know what we can affect, and know what we can't affect. It's one of the cardinal laws. It's so important. It's one of my top, it's right up there in the top 5 or even 10 mottos that I have, is that know your limitations in the sense of know what you can change and know what you absolutely can't change, and have the humility to realize the extent of your influence and not overjudge, not overestimate our influence on other people. It's very important. But never underestimate the spirit of a child. Outside the role, they have a spirit, and that spirit knows exactly how to free, right, anyone. Our spirit knows how to free us from any conundrum. And so by you having more faith in that, as opposed to the stereotype, that's where you need to focus your, be ready for both, but set your center of gravity in the spirit that is all-powerful, and it can undo in 1 second what you would try to do for years. There you are, getting in there, trying to explain it. Here's books, and let's study, and let's talk, and let's converse. In the end, it could come to nothing. In fact, the child could reject it because of other voices, other influences, right? By just holding the truth for that person and conversing more with the spiritual aspect, and having total and utter, and I mean total and utter faith in that spirit to do what is right, that's where the real action takes place on a more subtle level. Otherwise, you could just end up beating your own head against the wall and cracking your own skull in trying to help another person. You could do yourself enormous damage. And that's not recommended.
Thank you so much. It was great talking to you.
Mm-hmm. Great question. Very, very important. This is a very serious war we're in right now. And the kids are definitely the victims.
Absolutely, Michael, and thank you for that. That actually hit me on a deep level. I have a newborn daughter, my first time around, so I'm definitely taking some notes on this. So thank you for that. We want to move on to another question from the MTSAR Conspiratorium on Facebook, and this question comes from Shaquille. And Shaquille says, "I've watched and read a good amount of your work. My question is, where can I research my fate? Where can I read about the good route?"
Hold on,
Are we
sorry,
up?
yeah. I just lost. Give me 1 second.
Bring him back. Sorry, change
Oh,
the lights.
and I lost my...
People out there at all.
Oh.
I threw them away.
Log burner, as soon as I clicked, just close log burner.
Do you know where this was?
What?
Where that question was? Those things are Oh, hello, Michael.
Hey, Michael.
Hi.
Oh, hey, Michael. Yeah, I guess we got cut off there. Sorry about that. Little internet bump.
No worries.
Okay.
Sorry, Curtis, I brought you on by accident here. I'm trying to get you off.
Little technical difficulties. Bear with us there.
Eric, Curtis, can you hang up?
Quick, ask the question.
I don't know what happened. My computer just did a big fry. So Curtis, you got to hang up on your end, dude.
Just getting it delayed.
Thanks, buddy.
Okay, we're good?
Yeah.
Okay.
Why can't I get him big?
Big icon on the bottom?
There we go.
Okay.
Right.
All right, Michael, sorry about that. I'll just restart the question for you, and for anybody that might have missed it while we got cut off there. But this question is from Shaquille in the MTSAR Conspiratorium Facebook group. And Shaquille was asking, I've watched and read a good amount of your work. My question is, where can I research my fate? Where can I read about the good route? I understand the efforts of evil, but my question is, what are the efforts of the righteous? Even though the fight against evil is very important, what happens when evil is defeated?
Well, this is where he needs to, definitely make a study of the work I've provided on taroscopes, the mystery school, time gnosis, in other words, the divination arts. You can't go into a war without the right tools. These are diagnostic tools that help you understand the self. That's central to my work, the whole concept of unpacking what it is to be a self. And the most apropos way of doing that is through tarot, astrology, Kabbalah, and numerology. That's just it. Those are the tools. The numerology helps us with our daily timeline. Our daily interactions is very valuable to have that calendar. The tarot takes it to another dimension. You can do readings on every conceivable question that could possibly arise in your life. We have questions all the time going through our minds constantly. We have very important decisions to make in regard to relationships and business and finances and in moves, and location and in family, domestic issues and so on. And therefore we need to be able to go to our astrology or our tarot, or as I teach, a combination of all of these. So the simple answer is that in order to know the self, you have to have the right mirrors. And the right mirrors are the divination arts. So, Shaquille definitely needs to head over to taroscopes.com, check out the information we provided there, go over to timegnosis.com, look at that, and see if it makes any sense. Some of the modalities that we provided, they're very ancient modalities, but they're of extreme use in our world, taking care of all of our situation. If we're working on a weak platform, right? If our roots are weak, then how much change can we affect? The first wind that comes along, the first storm, and we're flattened. And this is it. This is the vagary. Rich one minute, poor the next. Up one minute, down the next. We go from happiness to anxiety in a matter of a few days, with all the pressures and some of the other stuff that we have to deal with. So the divination arts help us to come into balance, you see, so that we're not so thrown off our course by the vagaries of existence and the vagaries that fate throws at us. So that's my answer to that, really, is use the tools that have been provided by our own forefathers, not by Michael MTSAR, and I've just synthesized them, purged them of all the New Age crap that surrounded them, and make them available in a modern, format, technologically.
I have a question here from a person posting online at the moment, and I really like this guy's profile picture because it's Alex Gray's, embedded human being, and it's from Chichi Anga. And Chichi asks, 2 days ago I realized the scope of my memory, the body, is incredibly more vast than I can imagine. I cannot get a yes or no answer to questions instantly anymore. Do you know any techniques to further explore my true authentic self through my body?
Yeah, well, pick up the Alice Miller stuff. I'm no expert on it, so I've just been learning this myself. So pick up the Alice Miller books. Alexander Lowen, Language of the Body, Narcissism. Go to the men and women who have made this their life study. You need to be furnished with the intellectual facts anyway, because tomorrow you're going to meet somebody who needs exactly that kind of help. So just go to the core people, learn from them, and then pass that on to others who need it as well. Because whatever maladies you have, you can better believe that other people that you'll be meeting will have it as well. So I'm a huge fan of these authors that I keep mentioning. Go to that.
Okay, perfect. I'm going to try another Skype call here, Mike.
Yeah.
Let me see. Use it full screen. Where is she? And I'm going to call Catherine, who's in Birmingham, England, United Kingdom. Ooh. Why can't I add her to group call?
Oh, is there still Chris? I think it's because you still got Chris on there.
Yeah, how do I get Curtis off though?
He's got no talking on. Here, maybe in the meantime, I'll get Michael Bond.
Yeah, give Michael going on a question.
All right, Michael, while Chris is figuring that out, I got another question from the Conspiratorium. It comes from Stuart. And Stuart was just asking if you've ever broken down or gotten into the Catholic communion symbolism. And he's talking about the bread, wine, the words like, this is my flesh and this is my blood, etc.
Yes, I have, but it's a lot. Mostly will be coming up in the Female Illuminati project. Those are very feminine symbolism. I have got into it a bit in the Trees of Life and Astrotheology books. But one book I can also recommend for him if he's precisely interested in unpacking, deciphering that, is the book called The Two Babylons by Alexander Hislop. This is a very important book to get hold of because it shows you the pagan origins of that kind of symbolism. I think it's a quite valuable book in many ways for him to look into, and if he needs more information on it, you can contact me by email, and I should be able to recommend a couple of other volumes. And there was a question also on the Conspiratorium about book lists. And so that person who asked that question about, sources and lists of books that I recommend, that is mentioned on my Irish Origins site under the button that takes you to excerpts. There's a sources page. On the Atlantis book page, which you get to by going to michaeltsarion.com, you'll see the Atlantis link. There's a whole book list there as well. And again, people can just contact me through email if they need those lists. Also, if they watch Posthumanism or any of the lengthy presentations I've done, you will see me continually refer to, these great scholars that people can get into. But I'm more than happy to... because my work deals with such a vast variety of subjects that it's hard to know what people are into. So they can always be free to contact me for these book lists.
Okay, wonderful. We're still trying to figure out why I can't bring Catherine on. For some reason, Curtis is on here, but I can't kick him off. So Curtis, if you're listening, try to hang up your Skype call. Close down your Skype for me. On my end here, I don't know, something weird happened and it kicked both of us off earlier, and for some reason you're on there now, but there's no way for me to kick you off. So if anything happens, and maybe Michael will answer this last question, and then we're going to take a short little break, 5 minutes or so, and then I'm going to give you a call back and I'll get my end straightened out.
Okay.
But for now, Stuart from the MTSAR Conspiratorium Facebook page.
That was the last question.
Oh, you did that one?
Yeah, we just did Stuart. Let's move on to Venya.
Okay. Venya asks, "Hey Michael, love your excellent work. I was just wondering if you ever came across Anatoly Fomenko's work on the new chronology and the supposed deliberate falsification of history and its chronology."
Yes, I actually did notice that question, and the answer is yes. I've had the books for a couple of years now, and I finally did get rid of the books because I think it's bogus. I don't think it just didn't... It's a very intriguing concept, but there are many reasons why history that he is trying to present came out of Russia. It's a foible of being Russian, actually, strangely to say. It's too lengthy to go into. It has to do with their take on Western culture and civilization, and the fact that there's a certain marginalization that's happened to the Russian people, and this has created a propensity for a great deal of doubt, regarding the Western history. But first of all, it fascinated me, obviously, because I thought, my God, this guy may be onto something. But in the end, it just didn't have the ring of truth. So even though this guy's a very copious writer and has written many books, to me personally, it ended up not ringing true at all. So that's all I can say about that.
Okay, very good, Michael. We're just going to take a short 5-minute break. Everybody's just going to grab a glass of water and what have you. So what I'll do is I'll call you back. Dave's going to read out another question from the Conspiratorium Facebook page.
Okay.
All right, hey Michael, we got a question here from Brian, and Brian was asking, hey Michael, can you please clarify and explain whether the character Jesus actually lived, if there was actually a historical character, or if it was purely an astro-theological interpretation of Jesus in the Bible, and maybe what the differences might be, and he just wanted to add that he wanted to thank you for your work.
Well, thanks, Brian, and thanks for participating. It's a twofold question, really, because there's the Christ, which is a totally different sort of archetype than the stereotype Jesus. But following along from your question, there was a Jesus, you know, and if you research, as long as you don't think of him as a religious figure, which is what St. Paul made him into. But as a matter of fact, there is a personality, a stereotypical man called Jesus of Gamala, right, behind that. And I recommend you to read the works of Ralph Ellis, who features a lot of my work. Ralph's findings are just, you know, incredible. He's one of the greatest scholars of our time. And so pick up one of his books. He wrote King Jesus, which is the book that really goes into the question of Jesus of Gamala, even though he has other works on the same subject. And he's just come out with a new book that even fleshes it out even more.
Yeah. Okay. It's got a time on it, right? Stuff the video.
Yeah, did you close down your video stream window?
What?
Catherine?
Yeah. We got time lag on it. So I just leave the video in.
Yeah, leave the video off, close off your stream video. Michael was in the middle of asking a question, but we'll get back to that. If you want to ask your question to Michael and then hang up afterwards, that would be great. Thanks.
Yeah. Right, will it work now?
Well, turn off her video, all right? Just use the audio.
Yeah, her audio's on, her video's off. It's just
okay.
showing her icon picture here.
Oh, okay.
Can you ask your question, Catherine, please? It's not working.
Okay, that's not working out, so we'll try to get another one up here in a few minutes, but let's just get back to that original question maybe.
Yeah, that's mostly I had to say on it anyways.
Okay.
He should go over to Ralph Ellis. He's the experts on that. In volume 2 of the Irish Origins of Civilization, I've got several chapters on it, so if he wants to pick that up, he can. Or just go straight to the work of Ralph Ellis to find out this incredible story of the man Jesus and who he really was, and then how St. Paul took that character, who was mostly just a political character, really, you know, a very important one, and then scripted him into this messianic figure. It's a fascinating subject, you know.
Well, I've actually got Catherine's written question that she wrote into the MTSAR Conspiratorium group, so I'll go ahead and ask this one. I'm not sure if that's the one she wanted to talk about today, but it actually works with what we were just discussing. What she's asking is, much of your work focuses on the Bible and Christianity. Where does Islam fit in with all this? Does the Quran have secrets, and are Islamic scholars, or whatever they are called, in the same dodgy stuff as Christianity?
Yeah, they are. Judaism, and I think even, wasn't it, there's somebody else who asked a like question there about Islam, but yeah. Oh, Marie, it was Marie Ness, had asked a very similar question actually, on the Quran and what have you. Yeah, absolutely. There's even, if people go to my forum, right, there's a thread there called Islam. Check out some of the videos and the material I've made available there, because amazingly, it turns out that the whole religion of Islam was actually created by the Vatican. And that means the College of Cardinals.
Sorry about this, Michael. I don't know how. She's trying to call back in here. We're just going to get rid of this. Bear with us. 2 seconds. Very sorry.
It's okay.
Let's see what happened with this thing. Already stopped. Okay, there you go.
So yeah, the
Yeah, but I'm more.
Islamic so-called religion, is actually the creation of the College of Cardinals. This has been exposed very, very brilliantly by some very fine scholars who've traced it back. Also, just from a purely symbolic point of view, though, Christianity, Judaism, and Islam all come out of the same, they're all just hybrids of the same ancient cults that used to exist in the ancient world for many thousands of years. So there's not a hair's breadth of difference. There's a lot of window dressing on the surface, but basically underneath it, there are the solar cult operating, the Tsarion cult, and other cults operating. Not liking to have one central unitary religion, they've divided it so that they can then have conflict. As you study Islam more deeply, which means, again, go to my forum, look at those great authors, the Michael Hoffmans and David Livingstones and others. As you go deeper into it, you start to understand that Islam is really a crypto-Judaism, actually. If you strip Judaism back, not what average Jews understand, of course, right back into the Kabbalism, right back into the Judaism, which is slightly different. This is Atonism, this is Luciferianism. There's a Luciferian, Kabbalistic Cabal, right? Behind the obvious doors of Christianity and Judaism. Well, it's that same Luciferian or Atonist or Cabal, basically crypto-Jews, who are behind the rise of Islam, as is the crypto-Jews of the College of Cardinals. They're all Judites. I've said many times that the Queen of England is a Judite, even though she's the head of the Protestant Church, and the Pope is a Judite, even though he's ostensibly the head of the Catholic Church, because these divisions externally mean nothing. Well, Islam is another concoction of these psychopaths, all right? Zionism, crypto-Judaism, it's a very intricate and fascinating story of the Frankists and the Seveners, and I've made all that information available there. On a different note, let's look at it as just another one of these malignant patriarchal religions that's created so much toxicity in the world. There's nothing wrong with patriarchy and there's nothing wrong with matriarchy, but there are malignant versions of that, of both of those. And the Aryan, Age of Aries, let's look at Islam, a good deal of Christianity, the rabid, is the average evangelist any saner than the screaming mullah or the rabid Zionist? To me, they're all one and the same. Each one, you can't decide who's more lunatic, and they should just completely be wiped out. That's what I would say. We've got to get this pestilential, malignant religion off the face of this earth before any real change can take place, because not only is it through these religions, and so these religions are customized for certain kinds of people. Somebody go, well, why did they create all these different versions, the same hidden hand that you're talking about? It's because these people are experts in consciousness. They know that what works for one group of extreme Western people isn't going to work for a bunch of Orientals or a bunch of Middle Easterners who are coming out of a different mindset, archetypal. So you have to create the same solar religion, but you create it in all sorts of different modalities. It's like anything else that exists. A little bit more salt, a little bit more sugar. I mean, it's just a customized lunacy. But the one thing that you can be sure of is that from an astrological, astrotheological point of view, the rabid Christianity, the rabid Islamism, and the Zionism is very Aryan. So the Age of Aries is not much to do with the Age of Pisces, and the only thing it has to do with the Age of Pisces is the deception that's involved, and also the black hand, the treachery, the Neptunian treachery that's behind it, and maybe the need for people to literally dive into these religions. We talked about robotization. That you don't make a machine to be like a human. You bring a human, earlier we were talking about the children and the state that they're in. Yeah, you're just bringing the child, you're bringing the spirit down to the level of the robot, down to the level of machine. Do we understand that religion does that? We're suddenly looking at the advocates of the technical post-humanism, those scientism. What about theism? The whole selflessness. Christ exists, Allah exists, not me. The self does not exist, Or an invisible God that no one can prove exists. Well, he now exists because under the name of that God we can exonerate and we can justify any atrocities that we do. It's in the name of God. And we have this being now that can invisibly, design our morality for us, be a figurehead for us, justify all our crimes for us. This God is an incredibly utilitarian being. It's very handy to have such a phantasmagoria, up in the clouds, through which some of the worst human travesties can be perpetrated. And you don't just have one mode of it. You've got many, but the malignant patriarchy, the suppression of women, the ignorance towards animals, the despiritualization of the earth, and the over-spiritualization of people. It's all right to be spiritual, but not so over-spiritualized that you are not paying attention to your worldly existence, because you think, oh, this is just short-lived down here in this purgatory. I'm interested in the heavens and hells that come later. So man is over-spiritualized. He disregards his body. He disregards the keeping of the earth, Thomas Zaz brought out one time that by being over-spiritualized in this way, the church forbade you to dissect a dead body, and that retarded science. It retarded the medical knowledge. That's just one example of the retardation. They didn't want you embellishing anything. They didn't want you doing art. They didn't want you they didn't want you really discovering your humanness. All that mattered was the spirit, for these Martin Luthers and Calvins. While at the same time, the worst police state ever known, even until modern times, was John Calvin's Geneva. Only Napoleon had a more thorough-going police state. And talk about authoritarian, women could be beaten to death for just showing their arms, for having short sleeves in this John Calvinistic Protestant world. You should read up on it. It's unbelievable. You think the popes were worse, but these Protestants were no better, you see. So it's just psychopathy run riot. And we're still somewhat contaminated by a lot of this Aryan religion that doesn't have the higher Piscean and higher Uranian characteristics. And so people need to study that. They need to study it in the context of astrotheology, and they need to study it in the context of psychology, so that we can finally dispense with a lot of the worst traits of this religious institutionalization.
Brandon, who's posting on Facebook right now, he asked this question. My father, who is watching with me, asks if you see any significance to the pineal gland, and what are some of the things you can do personally to cleanse your psyche?
Well, that's huge, of course, and a huge thing. And it's not just one gland; it's all the glands. When we spoke earlier about the language of the body, I was speaking actually in a very trivial way. When you start dipping into it with the Alice Millers and all, in a way, this is good, but it's only the launching point to understand how the psychic attacks, to understand how the Big Brother has worked, how parents, through the food, forcing children to eat what may not be chemically right for them, because this is just what every other mother and father does, and this is what we buy in the store, and there's no observance of the sensitivity of the child's body, before they're already being stuffed with the most poisonous foods, the impure water, So although one can go into recommending all sorts of supplements and all, and I'm not an expert in that, so obviously I can't go down that road. But I would say that the more pure that your food is, it's very good. And most importantly, it's attitude. See, attitude equals emotional setting, doesn't it? And so if your emotional setting is correct, and I would say that one of the biggest things that needs to be looked into is simple things like Feng Shui, the way that your room is designed, the way that your home is designed, how much greenery is there, are there plants and flowers around you, are there good colors around you? See, there's so many aspects to this. Is there good Feng Shui? Is there energy moving in the place that you live, or is it stultified? Does it tend to become too fixed? And the energy is not flushed out enough. Also, the people around us, because our organs are very sensitive to picking up the energy of other people around us. Those who follow my work very closely, the ones who know about the psychic vampirism, will know that psychic attack is not just the cliched draining of energy. That's one of the symptoms of it, but it's only one of them. The other one is the simple polluting of our own energy field, and that means the glands. All right? You're talking about the glands. Well, it's the glands that are the little antennas that are the most receptive to this poisoning. So just as an alcoholic is, poisoning his liver or whatever, and people who eat too much sweet food and all of that, you're not doing too good to your body. Well, an infinitely more dangerous form of attack on yourself is the proximity of toxic people. Their fingernails may be nice and clean, but they could be dirty, dirty people. And you have to know how to check for that. And that's a whole subject in itself of how you do that. Because, they may wash behind the ears, but there's people out there who have a very, very toxic heart and mind. And we are walking in a sea of people like that. We meet them at work. They could be in very close proximity to us, and the damage that is done has not even been touched on. And even a lot of the works on psychic vampirism are pretty much pathetic spinner rack stuff that entirely focus on merely the cliche of you being drained of energy and what have you. They don't even deal. I'm the first one to deal. I've studied it for years and years, and it's only now that I've been able to put this work out. And hopefully it will be taken seriously, especially by people with a background in the medical sciences or allopathic or homeopathic medicine. They need to understand this because they're seeing the very clients and patients on a daily basis, are they not? Who are not only suffering bodily illness, but psychological illness. Now, these pineal glands and pituitary glands and adrenals and all of this come under attack very, very quickly. Especially in certain sensitive kind of people. And if you're not aware of this aspect of the psychic attack, which can happen from a multiplicity of sources, then I think things can be very bleak, because no amount of pumping supplements and medicine into you then at that point is really going to help. This is a thing to do with energy. It's got to do with an attitude. It's got to do with a conceptual understanding of the body as it really is, meaning subtle energies, right? Subtle vibrations, and how to protect. And this involves a study of mineralogy, of Feng Shui, of aromatherapy, of unbelievable amount of subject matter just to even get heads up. Running to allopathic people, is never going to work when it comes to the types of attacks that are on us. And so it's a building from the ground up again. The attitudinal aspect comes in when it's to do with the defenses. Attitude, when you want to physically keep these people away as much as you can, and then attitudinally sort of decompress from them, especially if you have heavy emotional cording with these people. But again, we could go on and on for hours on this, but the point is that absolutely it's crucial that we understand these kinds of attacks on our physical body and learn about that, not just think it all in terms of just psychic levels of existence.
Yeah, it's very good, and I agree with you 100%. Just as a follow-up to that, my own personal passion and research, and I may have mentioned this before, is to deal with subtle energies and the interaction of the human body with the earth, with the solar system, with the universe. And I just did a talk last week on this very subject. And the way I start off all my talks is we have to really picture ourselves as being embedded in a sea of energy. And I know you've used this term before as well. And it's removing one's consciousness from the body, the physical presence, which is only slow vibrational energy, and really experiencing the universe from a different point of view, and that's being basically surrounded, immersed in this energy. And I think it's these fundamental disciplines, like you mentioned, Feng Shui, Reiki, chakra healings, all of these different disciplines touch on this energy transfer in one form or another. I think where research in this metaphysical field is going, and it's going to start encroaching on regular scientific institutional understanding of energies. It's going towards the harmonization and the transfer of our energy and our bodies as an interface with this vast sea of particles, basically. And it's just very cool that this is the way things are going right now, it seems.
Well, also, and another note of warning exactly on those lines is that since the inception of this sort of homeopathic consciousness, there's been a tendency, and I still see it in a lot of people who email me and what have you, where we're still in the mode of running to another person to get the healing. I mean, and to an extent that's inevitable, right? But don't we see that that's also somewhat a carry-on of the allopathic system, is in going to the man in the white coat? So in the homeopathic system, by not learning how to do it yourself at home in your own way, and still running to a guy in a white coat or a woman in a white coat, you know, maybe that has to be deconstructed as well. Because remember, some of the people who set themselves up as healers are some of the most toxic people you could ever want to go near. You know, and I'm not the only one to find this out, so it's quite a well-known phenomenon actually. So let's understand that there's two schools of thought. There's running to the expert, you know, the acupuncturist, the acupressure, the raw thing, whatever. And then there's the study of these subjects yourself. You may not have to be very high up in it, but at least learning some of the basics. You must do that, because otherwise you're still giving your power away. And as I say again, some of the people who are setting themselves up as practitioners, you know, I wouldn't want them to touch my body. I wouldn't want to, you know, to have any treatment from these people just because they got, you know, just because they appear to have some qualifications in homeopathy. You don't know who you're dealing with. They could be 10 times worse than you are. So, you know, a certain amount of responsibility to learn these subjects out of love, out of interest in your own life, I think frees you from the tyranny of having to, you know, be yet again under the sort of care, right, of another expert, is why I say try to learn a lot of this stuff on your own. You can. It's very possible.
Absolutely. Thank you for that, Michael. And we do have another question from the audience, so I'm just going to pass that along.
Okay.
Hi, Michael.
Hi.
I love your work. Thank you so much. It's been such a huge inspiration, and especially because in my world, I have a background in psychology, but I also had this awakening with the conspiracy facts. And your work sort of pulls both the psychology and the conspiracy and the body and everything that I've been involved in. And it's a very integrating experience for me. So it just helps me become more whole. So in that sense, it's been a great help. So I just want to tell you a little bit about my personal journey, and then I want to ask you how I can integrate it better. I feel grateful that I have woken up, and I feel that a lot of the traumas and all the different things that happen through my life, one by one, have led me to this path of waking up. And it's a double-edged sword in the sense that I'm very grateful that I woke up, but at the same time I feel that it's left me with so many scars and so many battle wounds and everything that it took, all the losses and everything that it took for me to become an awakened person. And I mean, I can't even describe the suffering, but the result is a good thing in the sense that I have awakened. But now I'm left with a little bit of the trauma, basically PTSD, which I think is understandable when you just suffer so many traumas. And so the double-edged sword is, yes, I woke up, and holy shit, what it took to get here. So my question is, how do I resolve some of this past trauma?
What was your name?
Luciana.
Yeah. Thank you, Luciana. Well, this is an enormous problem that I'm sure many people who are listening to us now, I mean, you have no idea that what you're talking about probably makes up the biggest mass of emails that I get, and, you know, contacts and people talking about this, because the moment that you try to leave the consensus trance, it's almost like suddenly, you know, your head is just smashed off the walls of the universe. And, you know, it's because of that, and also similar experiences that I've gone through and seen other people go through, similar to what you're describing, is that in my work I start to realize then that it's not just a bunch of cloak and dagger wearing Illuminati guys that we have to worry about. It's these people in our own life who hurt us, who deal us foul, who are deeply treacherous, and so on, and just immoral or amoral as well as immoral. You know, and it seems to get worse. If we were just to bow down, get a job, go along to get along, most of these people, you know, would just be content to stick around, and tolerate it. But the moment that you do the Pilgrim's Progress, the moment that you commit to these deeper, in other words, leaving the religions, leaving the roles that we spoke of, any disturbance threatens people so deeply that then they just want to, strangle you, and or backbite you, or condemn you, or all this nightmare list of things that they do, starting with the parents and moving up to all sorts of other relationships one would have. You can barely open your mouth today at the place of work before they're going to take you out and throw you out and replace you with some demure, mousy, conformist imbecile. And then then we have to stress through most of our life to then find self-employment in order to stave off that problem of working with other people where they can actually jeopardize your entire material welfare. Some imbecile, and believe me, I've met many of them, trumped up, badge-wearing managers and so-called, the moment that they find that you're reading, oh my God, you're reading that? Right, out, or not right away, but they conspire to get rid of you and what have you. Or you're chumming up with the people they don't like, or you won't drink and do drugs with these people. There's a whole gamut of this stuff that penalizes you, and all you're trying to do is live within the Spirit. Yeah. Now, you look into the great martyrs, as I said, Wilhelm Reich died in jail, Ezra Pound, 11 years incarcerated. Wilhelm Reich himself was also expelled from several countries in the world. The list goes on of the Nikola Teslas and the Walter Russells and all the people who were either in their lifetime suppressed and ruined, brought to the brink of ruin. Tesla had to dig ditches in New York City because he wouldn't get a job. He wouldn't bow down and use his spiritual gifts as he was being told by his masters. He said, you're not gonna make me conform. All the way even into Christianity, where you have martyrs there in all the religions, even the purest of people. This has happened even in the realm of philosophy, where even the most highest minds of our world have been treated extremely badly. So your question is to see what can one do about it. You see, well, in the previous Conspiratorium, I think we had questions, didn't we, about whether evil makes us stronger, and I said no. I think it's actually doing good that makes us stronger. It's when we try to act in a moral way that we get the universe up on our face. Somehow the tests arise. If you're doing evil, it's nothing more than the conformity, going along to get along, taking the easy way out. So the good man, the truly good man, the moral person, right, the moral woman, the moral man, they are the ones who are going to have to fight. They're going to be the fighters. Because this is absolutely war. This is absolutely a war to the death. And the sooner that the person, like yourself, understands that it is indeed a war, and start to embody the samurai sort of mentality, then you are able to take the scars and the bullets. It's because...
I just want to say, I always felt that I was in a war, but it was my own personal war. And I ended up with PTSD, just like any soldier in Iraq would. So I'm very clear about the fact that I've lived a war for so many decades, and it just felt like fight after fight after fight until you end up with PTSD, just like a soldier.
Well, it's worse than a soldier because they only experience it for a very short time as high-intensity trauma, right? So there's a couple of ways of looking at this. There's high-intensity trauma for a short period of time.
Yeah.
There's low intensity trauma for a long period of time, and then there's high intensity for a long period of time.
Yeah.
If you fall into that last category, which I think many people do in the alternative movement, because it is over the stretch of their whole lives, so it's not just a small window where you had a trauma or a death in a family or exposure to war or exposure to temporary poverty or whatever. For some people, this can be a very prolonged and very intense war, from which, of course, there's going to be scars. In fact, I look for those scars. I want to see them. The darkest people I know, I shouldn't even use the word dark because it's wrong to even call the evilest people I know are the most glowing and wonderful and smiley and happy and light people. Really, I swear to God this is the case. The sort of dark, dour, bullet-riddled people that you have to come hobbling around, haven't a clue. These are the good people. You want to find a good person? look into the shadows, look into the corner, because they've, like you, like me, they can't even exist in this world. They don't know what you're doing. They go, leave me alone. It's like the Taoist. I'm just a fool. Don't include me.
Yeah.
You know, I can't even find my way to your table. I've been punched drunk.
Yeah.
The glowing, effervescent, one-seasoned, you know, creature, this light, unaffected. They're the ones you want to worry about. How can you not be affected by what's going on around you? How can you live in this one-season pathetic world of, you know, close out the world, close out the darkness? So I look for those. But there is an art of war, and once you get into it, you will not look at those wounds anymore in this pessimistic, fatalistic, and dour way. You will actually realize that that is what you gain from fighting the beast, fighting the dragon, and they will take on a different coloring altogether. You will actually worship your wounds. You will worship. You know, the Native Americans used to bring out their shadow man. You should read about the shadow man for the Lakota.
Okay.
He never came out except in war. When they had a fight, when a battle was on, they would do the rituals at that moment and pray for the shadow man to come out. And then after the battle, they'd thank him for his presence, the rage, you know, the battle, the blood feud, right? This is in all the ancient races.
Yeah.
Today we're so puppy-eared we can't understand what this means. Fighting evil is an art, it's a science. It requires the worship of the weapon. Right? Look at, you've read Lord of the Rings, you've seen the movie, look at the sword of Elendil. What does that mean? That's a spirit of a people. You know, and there's a worship, a ritual around those weapons. And we are that weapon. Our reason, our spirit is being used. And it is a defensive thing. Even in my illustration of what it means to be a self, I define the self by the most defensive thing about you. It is pure defense. It's resistance to everything. Because that's what otherwise you wouldn't be a self. In fact, the self is the only thing about you that says, I'm not that. The other thing, the ego, is the I am that. I am collective. I'm one with you all. But you know that people go, Michael, how do I know I've got an imperial self as opposed to an ego? I go, do you have something that says I don't want to do that? You go, yeah, of course. I have this resistant part of me that says not for me, because that's it. The part of you that can even resist anything, that can say no to a particular external reality or belief system or imposition, that is the imperial self speaking right there. It's the part of us that can say no. It's the part of us that is defensive. But I look at it very much like a weapon, you know, and there's a worship of that. There's a worship of that weapon, be it, there's all sorts of symbols.
I saw that in you. I see you on the internet, and I saw that in you. And I saw this strength. But I'm really glad you're putting words to it, because I saw your clarity, your strength, your determination that came across on the YouTube or whatever. And it was just something that I was lacking. So the fact that you put words to this is really helpful to me. I really appreciate that.
There's 2 points I wanted to thank you very much for that compliment, and I want to say 2 things. One is that every human being that is hearing our voice right now, I think you brought up something very profound, and it's made me realize something that I say to my friends, but I never said it publicly, and that is people need to actually go out and get a weapon of their choice. A sickle, a sword, a hammer, whatever, and have that as their, or even a picture of it, a throwing star, these Chinese throwing stars and whatever. Find something that is basically a weapon and a bow and arrow, and make it your totem.
Okay.
Include that in your life as the warrior. This is the first thing. And secondly, here's the weird quirk you were alluding to about my life. If people had left me alone, I wouldn't be the person I am now. I was quite willing to just do my researches and happily earn my money and read my books. But I don't know if it's the Irish, the Finns seem to have it as well, the Finnish people, and the Irish certainly have it as, you fuck with me and you're going to make me into what I am now. You actually made it worse for yourself by getting in my face and trying to stop me from being who I am. That's how I became who I am. I would have been nobody. I would have just been happy doing my own thing and not in anybody's face until the world got up in my face to say, you can't do this, you won't do this, or we're going to beat you up for doing it.
I totally relate to that, because I think I'm Italian, so I would have made a really good tomato sauce.
There you go.
And, worn a good apron, and, my construction worker husband would have brought home the bacon, And that would have been me, because that would have been my fate, because my father drummed it into me. And here I am today talking to you.
Yeah, there's a certain spirit of the Celts, from whichever place they've come, and the Scots-Irish have it as well. The Finns definitely have it, is that they'll be perfectly docile, Nobody, you won't even notice them in the room until the moment you get up in their face and tell them they can't do something or shouldn't do it. Well, you're just now guaranteed that this. So in a way, there's that defensiveness again. You know, to say, look, I'm going to push forward now because you've told me that I can't do it, or it's impossible. There's just something in the spirit of humans. In fact, this has actually been known sociologically. You know that whole idea we climb the mountain because it's there?
Yeah.
The human is the only animal who does something precisely because somebody says it can't be done. We take it for granted, you see, we forget this. It's like, you know, don't want to be Captain Kirk about it or anything, but there is this very strong, you know, to go where no man can go before. If you say it can't be done, the human being gets up and does it.
How do I not fall into the trap of rebellion, though? Because I know that rebellion has been an excellent tool for me, but at the same time, I don't want it to defeat me either.
You always want to stay close to the spirit of rebellion, but not so that it starts to drain you of necessary energy. Too much energy gets wasted in non-productive ways. You always want to be walking side by side with the spirit of rebellion, but you don't want to overdo it. You want to be, you know, like diplomatic, to conserve your energy, and then eventually channel that energy into more intellectual things or into some of the other things we've been talking about. If you get too animated by the spirit of rebellion, then you get into everybody's face, and then you're waving a placard, and you're burning up. You're getting into conversations with lunatics who are never going to change. They just think you're amusing. You're just almost entertaining them in a way, putting on a dance for them. So you always want to walk very closely to that spirit of rebellion, because it's one of the guides that's leading us through this maze. But you don't want to be so over animated by it that precious energy, which is all the more precious in today's world with all the commitments that we have. We've got to be very, very... Somebody asked earlier on about rest, and maybe we'll get to that question later, because it ties into what is rest. Do we really even know what it is, and are we taking it? You know, so the whole idea is to be able to conserve our energies for the work that needs to be done, a certain economics of energy. Well, these are great questions, which thanks very much for them.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you so much for being an inspiration in my life, and I love you. And I'm a friend, even though you don't know me that well yet.
Thank you for that.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
That was excellent. And I echo that, Michael. That was very well said. And coming from studying the warrior tradition myself, I've got my samurai sword on the mantle. It's my totem. It's the light of the samurai. And it was when they were writing about that and talking about what it meant to be a warrior, there was a lot more focus put on the inner aspects and the inner empowerment that needed to take place first, because you can't just hand a sword to some guy and say go out and fight evil and tyranny like you're talking about. You need to first put on your spiritual armor first. So I just wanted to add and support what you've been saying with that.
And for people, and exactly, the martial art tradition, you know, that's why I like working with you, both Chris and David, because you are already working with this concept and can grasp this, both in its a defensive way spiritually, but also in a physical way. It's both. But people who want to unpack this very deeply should read the book by Aleister Crowley called Book 4. It's part of his larger Magic and Theory and Practice, but you can buy it as a single book, and that's what I recommend. It sells as its own little book called Book 4. And there's a whole, probably the greatest writing ever on the whole concept of choosing your weapon and what it means on a symbolic and physical level as well. You know, in other words, he's talking about the tools of the magician. And as we know from looking at the tarot cards, that includes a wand and a cup and a sword and a disc, a plate. And so he analyzes those in a way that is absolutely monumental. And you could read that book in a day, and it's a very, very good book to have in people's library if they're interested in what Luciana was talking about and this whole concept of the warrior spirit. You know, there's no better book on it.
Wow, that's excellent. Well, Michael, there was one thing that we wanted to address, and I know that you wanted to talk a little bit about it on the Conspiratorium, and that was this concept of the age that we're living in. And you've spoken in the past about 2012, and we've seen, you know, a lot of different theories coming out leading up to 2012. Many of them didn't take place. The two main ones were that, you know, once that day passed, we're suddenly going to be living in this, you know, utopian society where everybody's free and liberated and spiritually alert. And then on the other coin, they're saying, no, it's absolute cataclysm and disaster. It's the end of the world. Neither of which really took place. And you've always been speaking a great deal in your work about how this is an age that we're in, not just a date. And I just wondered if you could get into that.
Well, yeah, I mean, I never bought into that, and I tried my best when we made Architects of Control to plug in another way of looking at it. 2012 is an end date, but it was the end of a cycle of consciousness, and a new one begins. And remember, I think it was on another Conspiratorium, I think it was on the first one, where we mentioned what Uranus represented when it moves into Aries, where it is now, and these other, there's about 6 or 7 other transits of Uranus coming up in the years to come. And it tied in, remember we talked about that so-called age of Aquarius, and what that might bring, and all of that, and the Uranian and Neptunian symbolism. And I made the point that, look, it doesn't rule all the people. This is a mistake in astrology. Astrologers keep on thinking too much about Uranus and Aquarius representing all people. It doesn't. It represents the people listening to us right now. It's the people tuned in right now. Uranus rules Uranian people, meaning those who have walked those paths less trodden, those whose minds are open to new possibilities, right? It represents those Nikola Teslas and the Walter Russells and the Wilhelm Reichs and those people who are doing this kind of work. So the age of awakening to which we're going is the awakening of the few who are working with those archetypes. The rest of the masses who are still stuck in the solar, Martian, Saturnian, Venusian, if you will, Jupiterian, you see, these other archetypes which are more of our ontic existence, to use a philosophical term, as opposed to the ontological, which is what the hell's it all about, the bigger questions, you see. So the one who's working with the Plutonic, working with the Uranian, and working with the Neptunian, those are the ones who the age of Aquarius is going to affect. It can affect you, and the other people around you won't even know what's going on. In fact, it is doing so. Isn't the technology we're using right now Uranian? Right? It is. And plugged into that is the concepts of psychology, which is Plutonic, by the way, the mysticism and spiritualism, and even other aspects of psychology, which are Neptunian. Right? So we've got, this whole thing is based on that. And the theories of the people like the Ralph Ellises and the Anthony Peakes and the work of people like myself, you see, is falling under these categories that are represented by these larger planets that I don't think a lot of astrologers have fully yet completely comprehended how they work, because they're very deconstructive. They're all about purging away. So if you talk to me about the countdown to 2012 being an age of deconstruction, and that still continues, believe me, then I'm with you. Then there has definitely been a change, and there definitely has been a quantum leap forward. But if people are thinking in terms of mass movements and transcendence and portals opening and all of this malarkey, this is just more of the same old New Age claptrap that is almost a mirror image of the religious claptrap about raptures and ends of the world and apocalypses in the physical sense. It's no different.
Thank you for that, Michael. We're going to get wrapping up shortly. I just got one more Facebook question here, and then I think Dave and I were talking. We want to just do a quick 10-15 minutes on basically the state of the alternative knowledge movement and where different aspects of that and where you think things are heading in the near future. So my last question here is from Patrick. And Patrick asks, Michael, I'm interested in hearing what you have to say about the blonde and red-haired mummies from Egypt and China.
Well, that's simple to answer. That was my whole Irish Origins book. So somebody, go over to the Irish Origins website. That's where you'll find all the information, and also pick up the Irish Origins book, because that is the whole concept of the migration of cultural elements from the west to the east. It's a very, very deep subject and fascinating, and I've loads of information I've been putting on the website for years and in those books. I also have a question that I received off the Facebook there from Jurga. It's a personal, she's asking me a personal question about, she's asking the question just what do I think about what lies after death, And I said at the first Conspiratorium that I don't really get into the questions of an abstract metaphysical, remember the 3 things I said I really don't get into, and one of them was abstract metaphysical questions about questions like this, and that's because I think about them all the time. But being a personalist, I don't ever influence anyone else when it comes to these more deeper and ultimately more important questions. Now, this question jumped out. What lies after death? Here we are, here we are living, and then we're going to die. What all about that? And of course, I've thought about this so many times. But I would refer her to the work of Anthony Peake. If she's not, I had to search my mind for references from all sorts of people. There's so many different schools, but I think the person with the greatest studies that are pertinent to our modern age is Anthony Peake, and there's a lot of, and it's Peake with an E at the end. And so there's lots of videos of him, there's lots of interviews that he's done. His book Daemon is the one I recommend. I think that he is the one to turn to. I have so many things that, I think he's misunderstood personally, but his thesis is still vital. And he's modern, contemporary. His book is fascinating. It's on Kindle, and there's other videos of him. And I think that people need to embody and take on board what he's saying about the spirit of man that he refers to as the daemon and its operations in our life. And then he talks about, what may lie after death. And as far as I'm concerned, I find his work fascinating and very inspiring and extremely interesting to go off on all these other threads. Because I'm no authority, and obviously I don't know what lies after death to give the short answer. I've got my own ideas. But I can tell you that the moment that I read that question, I really, I'm a big fan of Anthony. Definitely want as many people to pick up his work, pick up this book, Daemon, and check this out, because I think it is one of the, we're just talking there about 2012 and the Age of Awakening. I think the piece that he has discovered is of monumental importance. And even though I got some reservations about some of the stuff he's into, these are minor points just between him and I. I think people should definitely get their heads into his work, absolutely. And he has a lot to say on life after death and also near-death experiences and a lot of paranormal experiences, that we happen to have in our daily life, like when we're protected from certain accidents and what have you. He's got one of the most up-to-date and I think logical and rational theories about a lot of the paranormal stuff that goes on. Very cogent, very scientific, really and deeply fascinating work.
Well, yeah, then definitely people should check that out. Now, Michael, did you want to just go ahead and finish up with where we started, and we talked a little bit about this in the interview that you and I had done about the situation with the alternative research community, the conspiratorial community, and where you think that should be heading in the future, maybe where we are now and where you think we should really be going and focusing our energy and attention.
Yeah, well, we are in the early stages of ancient trauma. Trauma that was so deep that it is going to take in its own way ages and ages and ages to heal. The ego came about in order to hold or glue together, what could be salvaged of an ancient holism. Then when a child is, that's racial, right? That's the collective unconscious. And somebody also was asking a question about that. But then arises, when you're born, the ego, an individual ego. And the main focus, 90% of that ego, is going to be focused on living, survival, and socializing, right? Listening to what the parents are saying, trying to get along with everybody else, and integrating in the thing called society. And that's what's known in philosophy as ontic existence. It's nothing existential about it necessarily. There's nothing high about it. It's just getting along, going along to get along, and hopefully, you can do it in some sort of balanced way where you're not utterly compromised. Then there's this other weird ontological level where we question the bigger, like what we opened Architects of Control with, who am I, where am I going, what am I doing here, those kinds of things. What is all this about? Where does everything come from? What is life and where does it come from? Once you start asking those questions of the ontological level, the spiritual level, you see, whether you realize it or not, you've divided the roads. You've split yourself off from those people who are just going to continue going down this Saturnian, solar, reward mechanism, basically hedonic life. You've gone down another road. And that road, as you turn the corners, as we are now doing, is going to be fraught with a lot of problems, a lot of suffering. One guy asked, I think it was Ren, he asked a question about the symbolism. Was there a change in the symbolism after the trauma? In more modern times, say in the early days when we had the whole brain, did we work with symbolism in a different way than we do now? Absolutely we do. Because the symbolism of trauma, right, the symbolism of earthquake, of waters rushing in, of deluge, of flood, of cataclysm, is actually in our race memory. And you only need to go to the mythologies. Look at the mythologies of Jesus on the cross, suffering, Odin hanging on the tree, Buddha suffering under his tree, Horus going through the underworld and fighting the demon dragon, right? In Maya teachings, you've got No Skin, the god who plunges into the universe in order to get things going, to stir it up. Quetzalcoatl also being crucified god. Sir Percival, right? In the Parsifal myth. King Arthur, the trials of King Arthur and the searching for the Holy Grail. Prometheus being tied to the rocks with a vulture picking out his liver, right? Hercules, they call it the trials of Hercules. Orpheus coming out and losing Eurydice, losing his other self. That's the symbol of the ego, losing, getting out of touch with the tune and the symphony of the higher self. Betrayal, loss of a world, loss of an epoch, right? Loss of the golden age. You can't turn to any mythology without that symbolism. So we're just reeling from the shock of this. And the images of suffering, the symbolism are replete. And so that shows you that we are literally born out of fire. And now we're moving forward, and the ego is this part of us that is this individualism. It's striving to separate itself from, the collective. That's its job. And how successfully we manage to do this. How we manage to build new systems of government. How we, work with the socio-political systems to make them more sanitized and improved. In other words, how we learn to discern the psychopaths in our midst. If you call it domestic or political or communal, it doesn't matter. The psychopaths, the irredeemable people, an understanding of evil. Where we're going in the future is that the critical skills, the judgmental skills, the ability to discern evil as opposed to misdiagnosing it or justifying it like the medical profession want to do. If nobody's responsible, everybody's just an addict, everybody's got mental disease, let's give them some more drugs. We are moving further and further away from being able to call evil evil. And as Ayn Rand pointed out, the consequence of the man who no longer knows how to spot evil, in the end he doesn't know how to spot what is good. And that's the plan. The plan of Big Brother is when you cannot discern even simple evil, then the result is you don't even know what true good is. And that's where we're heading. The kids today are not rational enough. They have no hard wiring to even know what more basic morality is. They did a poll about asking kids, what if I say the word moral to you, what can you say? And the questions were like, unrelated. The best that you could get was, don't kill people or don't hurt anyone. That was the best you got. There was no No, that's not the child's fault. That's the bloody parent's fault. You haven't walked them through what it means to know what is moral action. To harm another is to harm oneself. As the Bible says, do unto others as you have them do unto you. These simple principles that if they were done by even our politicians, my God, we'd be so better off. So we are in the early stages, but one must never forget that the whole secret of another question jumped to mind about somebody who's asking more about what do we do? What we do, we don't do, we be. Doing is, you're going to do all the time, you see. Doing, we've mastered. And I'm not like people say, stop the doing, that's not what I mean. But you have to learn how to be. Man, we don't even know how to rest. We use that word, I don't know if anybody even knows what it means. Try to observe in your own life how hard it is to rest without the phone going off and text messages and Christ knows what and neighbors and street noise and the family ringing up and birthdays and marriages, funerals and God knows what else. You see, so we have no real rest even, let alone the art of being. These are arts. It's actually an art to know how to be and then move from that place. You see, or it's again a defensive thing, isn't it? It's going to be you have to stop the world. How do you get that world to stop? These things are arts. So the last thing I'd say is again what we said earlier is that there are tools. For every problem there can be a solution. By using divination, by using the numerologies and the tools, and as you're working with the martial arts and other things, and with art in general or music, there are many modalities that people need to arm themselves with. And always, always, always try to become an authority on it yourself, as opposed to always looking to other people for your answers. This is also extraordinary for the New Age.
Yeah, no, and I just to further that a little bit, and what you're speaking about rings really true for me. Being the father of two young girls, 8 and 4 years old, And getting into all of this, getting into your research and all the other great researchers out there on exploring myself, exploring my environment, my reality, my consciousness, it opens up a lot of doors. And, you know, I can't, the moment my daughter was born, I can't just, I couldn't shut the door and be that parent. What really rang true to me, and how to pass on what I'm learning, even though I haven't concluded anything yet, to my daughters in their sponge years, was basically to be very open with them. But I told myself, the one thing that I can do that I know is right is to stop the cycle. The cycle meaning what my parents did to me. There seems like this cyclical thing, and we got into this earlier tonight, is your parents, you know, God bless them, love them to death, but they don't know, they didn't go down those paths. They did what they thought was right, and I love them for it, but I also know that they did a lot of damage. It wasn't their fault, and I forgive them, and I have a great relationship with them now, but I had to stop that cycle, those lessons that they thought, that they pumped into my head. And I just cut them off right there. And I'm not passing those on to my children. I'm passing what I think are good moral lessons and values to my children. And I'm also, like you said earlier, right at the start, is getting them out into nature, getting them out experiencing just being in a forest and just laying on the ground. And for a 4-year-old child, that is the most profound thing for them. They're surrounded by toys and gizmos and gadgets and Nintendo and iPads and iPods, and for me to take my 4-year-old girl out into the forest and tell her to lay on the ground for 15 minutes, she doesn't want to at first, but at the end she asks, "Daddy, can I do that again?" And I think that's where we have to go. We have to go a little bit further, and what you said really rings true to me, so I just wanted to bring that up.
Well, yeah, herbalism, horticulture, permaculture, animal husbandry, Feng Shui, geomancy. You know, in Indian they call it Vastu, V-A-S-T-U. All of these modalities should be shared with children. The moral questions should be discussed with them, because, as I say again, they're our teachers as well as we are their teachers. And remember that the real parent in any of us is the higher self. Like we were speaking earlier, the parent is really the outward representative of the child's inner self. This is, you know, in the optimal way. And so if you can sort of, because remember, there's a wall of all what the world is putting there. So their inner voice is working, their inner moral conscience is working, the voice of the imperial self, which the world wants to suppress and create the pseudo-self. But if we can at least operate from the outside, then we've got two forces working for the good. Their own inner conscience, right? And then their external. But as we were talking with Luciana, there's a price to pay, because the external representative is shit on, you know? Nobody, the person who's trying to hold the light for another will suffer. But, you know, in a parent-child relationship, unfortunately, that's the gig. You have to hold that light for that child and try to mirror its higher self. It's easier to do if you're in touch with your higher self. Then things work really well, because a lot of it is non-verbal then, you know, and we can transcend the words. It's a matter of feeling, it's a matter of understanding on an intuitive level, which is extremely important, because all the verbal, and especially in Western cultures and society, we put too much of it to teaching is too much verbal. Some things that, you know, it's almost like the silence in the music is as important as the music itself. So a lot of parents are too verbal, too wordy, because they don't have enough trust in the higher self of the child. There's too much hardwiring in the physical sense, you see? Like it's blocks you're working with. And this can also be not so good. If the child is exposed to drawing and painting and art and certainly music, not just now and again, but for long periods of time. You know, I mean, it's really a major thing in that child's life. And then moving into more of the sciences of animals and husbandry and herbalism and a whole variety of other things one could mention, even healing to that extent. But certainly working with the hands, working with the body. There's no reason for pessimism at all. It's just all the things that the schools drum out of us, you know, with their hyper-competitiveness and, as I said, toxicity. You're plunged into that plasma we talked about of all these toxic kids, and then your kids coming home and get colds and illnesses and sicknesses, and then the schools are asking you to vaccinate, you know, and the whole authoritarian structure of that, demanding, you know, that you conform to these social things, and you're in a bad trouble if you don't go along. You know, very, very difficult there. And those vaccinations can, in a worst case scenario, dramatically affect not only the physical but the mental health of the child. So you're up against it from day one. It's very, very difficult. And at least if you have to have some of those negatives coming in, at least you should have at home something that at least can compensate, you know, to compensate for it. But I think that the children, you see, being the closest to the spirit since they're just born, in a way, we can learn from them. But that learning is on a non-verbal level. And a lot of parents don't want to go there, or are incapable of going there, or never were there on themselves. See, when they were children, they were never allowed to go into that place. So as far as they're concerned, they're even threatened by it, but they don't know it exists. So when we have to look into our own parenting and how we were brought up, and then go and do the research to change that, read people that, you know, we can analyze what happened to us, makes us better people, makes us better human beings, first of all, and then if you're a better human being, you definitely are going to be a better parent. But trying to just study what parenthood is, you know, without any spiritual component is never going to work. Because you have to, the greatest parent we have and the greatest parent the child has is their own higher spirit. And there's a communion on that level that needs to take place, which is wordless. Has very little to do with sitting down, you know, with sort of physical ABC, so to speak.
Thank you for that, Michael, and thank you for, you know, your work and for your courage and for your honesty and your passion in what you do. I think that I also want to thank all the people that asked these great questions in the Conspiratorium page, and those that called in and everybody that participated, the fantastic people we have here tonight. Thank you for coming and attending and sharing your thoughts and bringing your questions to bear. I really like this format personally, where people get to come in and actually hit it there.
Cool.
We get people in and we can all just share and talk and you know, discuss these concepts. And to be able to have this is unprecedented, like you brought up in the beginning. We've never had this ability to do this online with so many people around the world than now. And so for me, it gives me a great deal of optimism.
Me too. I'm especially impressed with the quality of the questions. All of the conspiratorians, but this one was a little extra octave, you know, like, whoa, these are very, very, very on the ball. They're exactly what I would expect for, you know, the post-2012 period of time. And we'll unpack them more. I will be answering some of these in written form on Facebook itself. And we'll always keep ones we didn't get to for the next time as well. So we'll try to get to everybody's questions eventually in one form or another. But big thanks from me, for David, Chris, both of you. Thanks a lot for putting the effort and the energy in. You guys are great.
I'd just like to thank Dave and everybody that's here tonight and everybody that's watching online. It's one of those cliches, without you this wouldn't be possible. And I draw so much energy every time I'm on that Facebook page, and I love when people ask questions. That's what I'm all about. That's where I am in my life. There's no such thing as a bad question. It shows bravery. It shows that warrior spirit that we all have to let out in us. A kind, loving warrior, basically, and to promote that as much as we can. So, again, Michael, from all of us here in Toronto and around the world, thank you so much for your work, and we look forward to chatting with you again.
Yeah, I love the T-shirt, Chris.
Thank you.
The best.
Okay, guys, for now.
Awesome. Bye-bye.